The wine hit his chest before anyone could stop it. 500 people in that ballroom went dead silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Because every single one of them knew you didn't embarrass Dante Moretti. Not in public, not ever. Men had disappeared for less. The woman standing there with an empty tray and red wine dripping from her fingers looked like she was already writing her own obituary. But then Dante did something nobody in that room had ever seen him do before. He smiled, and he pulled her closer. If you want to know why that moment changed everything, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The invitation arrived at Evelyn Harper's desk on a Tuesday, which was already a bad day for her because she had broken the office coffee carafe that morning, printed 40 copies of the wrong agenda for the 11 o'clock meeting, and stapled her sleeve to a quarterly report in front of 3 senior partners. By the time the cream envelope landed in her inbox, heavy paper, embossed seal, the kind of stationery that smelled like old money and quiet menace, Evelyn had already used up her daily quota of apologies before noon. She picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, as though it might bite her, and read the typed line at the top. The Moretti Foundation Annual Gala, black tie. The Ashford Grand Ballroom, Saturday, 8 p.m. Her name was handwritten below the printed text in ink so dark it looked like it had been put there with absolute intention. Evelyn stared at it for a long time. She had been working as executive secretary to the Moretti Group for 11 weeks. 11 weeks of learning the rhythms of a building where nobody smiled in the elevator, where conversation stopped when she walked into rooms, where men in expensive shoes watched her the way wolves watch something small crossing an open field. She had taken the job because the salary was 3 times what she had made at her previous firm, and her mother's medical bills had a way of making a person say yes to things they might otherwise run from. She had not yet met Dante Moretti in person. She had seen him exactly 4 times, twice through the glass wall of the 43rd floor conference room, once from across the lobby when he was leaving in a black car that materialized from nowhere, and once on a security monitor feed she hadn't been supposed to see, where he was sitting very still in a dark room while a man across the table from him slowly stopped talking. She didn't know what happened after that. She'd closed the feed and never mentioned it to anyone. But she knew who he was. Everyone in New York knew who Dante Moretti was, even the people who pretended not to. She tucked the invitation into her desk drawer, went back to reprinting the 40 correct agendas, and told herself that attending a gala for a man like that was the kind of decision she should sleep on. She didn't sleep at all that Thursday or Friday. By Saturday evening, she was standing in her bathroom in a black dress that had seen better years, applying lipstick with slightly trembling hands and arguing with herself in the mirror about the nature of professional obligation. Her cat, a bad-tempered tabby named Gerald, watched her from the toilet lid with the expression of an animal who had already calculated the odds and found them unfavorable. "It's one night," Evelyn told him. Gerald blinked slowly and said nothing, which was exactly the kind of commentary she deserved. Well, the Ashford Grand was the kind of hotel that made you feel underdressed the moment the cab pulled up to the curb. The building was pre-war stone and gold-lit windows and doormen who looked at your shoes before they looked at your face. Evelyn paid the driver, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and immediately caught her heel in a sidewalk grate and lurched forward hard enough that a passing stranger, a bald man in a tuxedo, had to grab her elbow to keep her vertical. "Steady," he said, not unkindly. "Thank you," she said, pulling herself upright with as much dignity as a woman can muster when she has just nearly face-planted in front of a 5-star hotel. "I'm completely fine." "Sure you are," he said, and walked away. She smoothed her dress, checked that her small clutch had survived the collision, and walked through the revolving door into the lobby, where the noise of Manhattan disappeared completely and was replaced by the sound of a string quartet and 400 people pretending they weren't watching each other. The ballroom was extraordinary. She would give it that. 12-foot crystal chandeliers cast everything in warm, honeyed light. Round tables draped in white silk spread across a floor that probably cost more per square foot than her apartment. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes, wearing the smooth professional expressions of people trained to see nothing and remember less. At the far end of the room, a small orchestra played something Evelyn vaguely recognized but couldn't name, something dark and European that seemed designed to make you feel like you were in a film about people whose problems were much more elegant than yours. She grabbed a glass of champagne from the nearest tray. She needed something to do with her hands, and began the careful, cautious process of navigating through a crowd of people she didn't know, trying very hard not to bump into any of them. She managed, surprisingly, for almost 40 minutes. She found her assigned table, exchanged pleasantries with a silver-haired woman from the Moretti Group's legal department who spoke in careful, measured sentences and watched Evelyn with eyes that cataloged everything. She accepted a menu she couldn't afford to think about and declined a second champagne because she had learned, the hard way, over many years, that champagne and her spatial awareness were not compatible companions. She was doing fine. She was absolutely doing fine. And then a server placed a tray of red wine glasses on a small service station near her table. 12 glasses, full, deep burgundy red, arranged in a neat formation, and asked Evelyn if she could carry it to the adjacent table while he ran to the kitchen because the other server had just dropped something and there was a minor crisis involving a senator's wife and a shellfish allergy. Evelyn looked at the tray. "I probably shouldn't," she said. "Please," the server said. "It's literally 4 feet." She looked at the tray again. 4 feet. The adjacent table was right there. 12 glasses of red wine, yes. But a grown adult human being could absolutely carry 12 glasses 4 feet on a tray without incident. She was 34 years old. She had 2 working hands and functioning depth perception. "Okay," she said. She picked up the tray. She took 2 steps toward the adjacent table, and Dante Moretti walked out of the crowd directly into her path. No, she had maybe a quarter of a second to see him clearly before it happened. Tall, dark-suited, silver threading through black hair at his temples. The kind of face that was composed rather than handsome. Everything arranged with precision, jaw set, dark eyes moving across the room the way a chess player's eyes move across a board. He was turning to say something to the man beside him, and he was not looking at her at all, and there was simply no time. The tray tilted. The glasses went. The wine hit his chest in a wave. All of it, or so it felt, all 12 glasses. Though logic said that wasn't possible, but logic had very little authority in that moment, and soaked through the white of his dress shirt and the dark of his jacket in a bloom of deep, dark red, spreading like something out of a painting about consequences. The string quartet stopped. The crowd, not all of it, but a significant portion of the nearest cluster, went completely, absolutely silent. Evelyn stood there, with an empty tray, her mouth open, the words "I'm so sorry" already forming but not yet making it out, staring at Dante Moretti's ruined suit and understanding with every nerve ending in her body that she had just done something catastrophic. He looked down at his chest. He looked up at her. And every person within 20 feet of them braced themselves, the way you brace for an impact you can already see coming but can't stop. Basam. Later, when she tried to reconstruct those seconds in her memory, Evelyn could never quite get them in the right order. What she remembered most clearly was the quality of the silence, the weight of it, the held breath, the stillness of 200 people waiting for the moment when the surface tension broke and everything went wrong. What she remembered second was his face. Not rage, not the cold, efficient fury she had been anticipating, not the controlled violence she had glimpsed through glass walls and security monitors, and the careful, frightened stories that floated through the building's lower floors like smoke. His face was still. Not blank, exactly, but gathered, like a man who had decided something very quickly and was already settled in that decision by the time anyone else had finished processing the fact that a decision needed to be made. He reached into the breast pocket of his ruined jacket, produced a folded white handkerchief, actual cloth, she noticed, not paper, the kind nobody carried anymore, and handed it to her. She took it automatically. "Your hand," he said. "You cut it." She looked down. There was a small cut on the side of her palm where the edge of a falling glass had caught her. She hadn't felt it. A thin line of red ran from the base of her index finger down toward her wrist, mixing with the dark wine stain on her skin. "Oh," she said. "Press it," he said. She pressed the handkerchief against her hand. Then he did the thing that stopped the room. He placed his hand gently at the small of her back. Not grabbing, not directing, just present. and drew her half a step toward him, away from the scattered glass on the floor, and said, in a voice that was quiet enough that only she and the four people immediately beside them could hear it, "It's only a suit." And he smiled. Not a performance, not a message to the room. A private thing, brief, real, aimed at her. And she was too stunned to do anything except stare at him and forget for a moment that she was supposed to be apologizing. She started. "Don't," he said, and the smile faded but gently, the way light fades at dusk. "It's done. Are you all right?" Nobody had asked her that. She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded, because she didn't trust herself to produce coherent language. He turned to the man beside him, one of the expensive shoe men, dark-haired, thick-necked, with the particular expressionlessness of someone paid to have no visible reactions, and said, "Marco, make sure Ms. Harper gets what she needs for her hand." Then he straightened his ruined jacket, turned back toward the room, and walked away into the crowd as though he had simply paused to check his watch. The quartet started playing again. The surface tension broke in the other direction, not into disaster, but into the odd, relieved exhale of a crowd that had expected violence and received grace instead, and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the cognitive dissonance. Evelyn stood there with a borrowed handkerchief pressed to her hand, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine, and the low, immediate buzz of 200 people beginning to whisper. Marco appeared at her elbow. "Come with me," he said. Not warm, not cold, simply factual. She went. In the corridor outside the ballroom, a first aid kit materialized from somewhere, and a woman in hotel staff uniform cleaned and bandaged Evelyn's hand with practiced efficiency. Marco stood 6 feet away, watching the middle distance, radiating the particular professional disinterest of a man whose job involved witnessing many things he was paid not to think about. "Who are you?" he asked, without turning. "I'm the executive secretary on the 43rd floor," Evelyn said. "I've been there 11 weeks. He said nothing. "I know who Mr. Moretti is," she added, because the silence had a shape to it that seemed to be waiting for that acknowledgement. "Everyone knows who Mr. Moretti is," Marco said. "I mean, I work for him. I wasn't planted here. I wasn't trying to. The server asked me to carry the tray, and I shouldn't have said yes. I knew I shouldn't have said yes. I have a history with trays, and it's—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm explaining myself to you." "Because you're scared," Marco said, still not looking at her. She thought about denying it, decided that was pointless. "Yes." "Don't be," he said. "He said what he said. When Mr. Moretti says something, it's done." Just like that. Just like that. The woman finished bandaging her hand and stepped back. Evelyn flexed her fingers, testing the movement. The cut wasn't deep. It would be fine by Monday. "Go back in," Marco said. "Have dinner. Don't leave early. Leaving early would look like something." "Like what?" He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had filed that question as unanswerable for people at her clearance level. "Like something," he said again. "Go back in, Ms. Harper." She went back in. "Bob Bassi." Dinner was a 3-course exercise in controlled anxiety. Evelyn ate without tasting anything. The silver-haired lawyer across from her, Renata, she'd learned, Renata Voss, 30 years in the organization's legal structure, nails like weapons, watched her with barely concealed fascination and asked, very precisely, "Are you always this exciting to sit next to?" Which didn't seem to require an answer and didn't get one. From across the room, at the elevated central table where the most important people sat, the ones who didn't have assigned tables because rooms arranged themselves around them instead, Evelyn was aware, twice, of being looked at. She didn't look back both times. The third time she couldn't stop herself, and when her eyes found Dante Moretti's across the distance, he was already looking elsewhere. She told herself she had imagined it. She ate her salmon, she drank water. She did not knock anything over for the remaining 2 hours of the event, which she counted as a significant personal achievement. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, flat October light that Manhattan specialized in during the weeks when summer had definitively surrendered. Evelyn was at her desk by 7:45, 43 floors up, with her bandaged hand wrapped around a coffee mug, trying to decide how to describe herself on a resignation letter and whether the phrase deeply unsuitable was too honest or not honest enough. She had drafted 3 versions over the weekend. She was working on a 4th when the phone on her desk rang with the internal signal that meant the 43rd floor's direct line. She picked it up. "Miss Harper." His voice on the phone was different from the ballroom. Quieter, flatter, all the ambient noise of the event stripped away. It sounded like a closed room. "My office, 10 minutes. The line went dead before she could respond. She put the phone down. She looked at the unfinished resignation letter on her screen. She saved it to her desktop under a file name that said Draft and went to find her notepad and pen. Dante Moretti's office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 43rd floor and had the kind of view that reminded you of your own smallness. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a city that seemed, from up here, to have been arranged for someone's private contemplation. The furniture was spare and serious. A long desk, clean-surfaced. 2 chairs facing it. A credenza along one wall with no personal photographs, no decorative objects, nothing that could be read. A single painting, abstract, dark blues and grays, the kind that didn't ask you to feel anything specific. He was standing at the window when she entered, his back to her, looking out over the city in the gray morning light. He had changed suits since Saturday. Of course he had. This one was charcoal, perfectly fitted, as though it had been designed specifically for the geometry of his particular posture. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He turned. In the daylight, stripped of the ballroom's flattering glow, he was harder to read. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she'd noticed Saturday. There was something about his face that suggested a long-term argument with sleep. He was somewhere in his mid to late 40s, she had gathered, though the Moretti Group's internal documentation was, she had discovered, strategically vague on personal details. He looked at her hand, the bandage. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, it wasn't serious. Thank you. For Saturday. For how you—" She stopped. "I've written a resignation letter. 3 of them, actually. I can have one finalized by noon if you'd prefer to handle it that way." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, more like recognition. "Sit down, Ms. Harper. I'd rather stand while I'm being fired, if that's all right. I'm not firing you." She looked at him. "Sit down," he said again. She sat. He moved to the desk but didn't sit behind it. He stood beside it, which put him at a slight angle to her, not directly facing, the way someone stands when they're choosing their words carefully and don't want their expression to do too much of the work. "You've been in that building for 11 weeks, he said. "Yes. In those 11 weeks, 3 of my senior directors have taken unscheduled personal days on the same dates. A draft term sheet from a private acquisition disappeared from the secure server for 6 hours on October 2nd and returned with no log of access. A meeting between myself and 2 overseas partners was attended by someone who was not invited for approximately 4 minutes before the building's security noticed." He paused. "Are you following this?" Evelyn's mouth was dry. "Yes." "What I am about to tell you does not leave this room." He said it without emphasis, which made it more serious than emphasis would have. "There is a leak in this organization. It has been active for somewhere between 4 and 7 months. It is not an outside breach. It is internal." He finally moved around the desk and sat, and now he was looking at her directly. The way he'd looked at her in the ballroom, that gathered, decisive quality. The eyes of a man who had already finished processing something that other people were still catching up to. "I've had 3 separate internal investigations," he said. "All 3 produced no meaningful results. The people running them were either incompetent or compromised. The people I trusted most have become people I cannot afford to trust." He picked up a pen from the desk, turned it once between his fingers, set it down. "But I've been watching the outer offices. The spaces people don't notice because they don't think they matter." Evelyn said nothing. "You notice things," he said. "I'm sorry?" "The Anderson file. 3 weeks ago. You flagged a discrepancy in a footnote, a number that didn't match a line 3 pages earlier. You put a post-it on it, left it on the senior partner's desk, and never mentioned it again. The discrepancy was not an error, it was intentional. The partner in question has since resigned. He paused. You didn't know what you'd found. I just thought it was a typo, she said. You flagged it anyway. I was being thorough. I didn't. October 7th. You were delivering documents to the third-floor conference room and you walked in during a phone call. You excused yourself and left. But before you left, you heard enough to understand that something wasn't right. 2 days later, you reorganized the entire filing system for that floor's communication logs, unprompted, and you used a categorization method that happened to create a searchable record of every external call made from that room for the past 4 months. The air in the room felt different. I thought the system was disorganized, she said carefully. It was. He looked at her steadily. You also thought something was wrong, and you created a record without knowing exactly why, because you are the kind of person who does that, who keeps things, categorizes things, files things away, not because you know you'll need them, because some part of you knows that things matter more than they appear to. He stopped. I need that. I need someone who sees what isn't supposed to be seen and doesn't know they're seeing it and keeps records anyway. Evelyn sat very still. What exactly are you asking me? She said. To move your desk? He said. To the anteroom outside this office. To work directly beside me as my primary secretary until I know who is destroying my organization from inside it. The city spread out behind him through the glass, gray and enormous and indifferent. You want to use me as bait, she said. No. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, but precision. I want to use your eyes. There's a difference. That seems like an important distinction that reasonable people might disagree on. Probably, he said. But you're going to say yes. She looked at him. That's a confident prediction. Your mother's bills, he said very quietly. Not cruelly, just factually, which somehow made it harder to absorb. Your prior firm, the reason you took this job. He paused. I'm not threatening you. I'm pointing out that you're a person who makes difficult choices because you don't have the option of easy ones. And what I'm offering you, in exchange for what I'm asking, is a very significant increase in your compensation. Evelyn said nothing for what felt like a very long time. If something happens to me, she said, in the course of whatever this is, it won't. You can't guarantee that. No. He agreed. I can't. He met her eyes and held them, and she had the unsettling sensation of being seen with considerable accuracy by someone who found accuracy more comfortable than comfort. But I can tell you that the people in this building who have been hurt were not hurt because of my negligence. They were hurt because someone I trusted chose to hurt them, and I will not allow that again. She pressed her bandaged hand flat against her knee. She thought about the resignation letter on her desktop, the 3 drafts. The word unsuitable in all its variations. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone last Sunday, tired but still trying not to sound it. She thought about the number at the bottom of the last hospital invoice, and the number in her bank account, and the distance between them. She thought about the filing system she'd reorganized on the 3rd floor, and the footnote discrepancy, and the small quiet certainty that had moved through her like a current when she'd put that post-it note on the senior partner's desk. The feeling of something being wrong that she hadn't had the language for and still didn't, not really. All right, she said. He nodded once, not triumphant, just settled. One condition, she added. He waited. I reserve the right to spill coffee on you again if the situation requires it. A beat of silence. Then, very briefly, the same thing she'd seen at the gala. Not quite a smile, but its nearest neighbor. Noted, he said. Marco will handle the desk relocation. You start today. She stood. She was at the door, hand on the frame, when he spoke again. Ms. Harper. She turned. The suit, he said. It was 11,000, not 10. For the record. She looked at him. In case accuracy matters to you, he said. It does, she said. For the record, I knew it wasn't an accident. He went very still. The wine, she said. The way I was positioned, the tray. I've been thinking about it. Someone moved that service station to exactly that spot, probably an hour before you walked out of the crowd. It was positioned for a collision, It wasn't random, and it wasn't just me being clumsy. She paused. I don't know what it was for, but it wasn't random. The stillness in him had a different quality now. It was the stillness of something she couldn't name, something that lived between calculation and something raw, something he didn't let most people see. Close the door on your way out, he said. She left. She walked down the corridor to her old desk, sat down, opened the resignation letter on her computer, and deleted all 3 drafts. Her hands were shaking, she noticed. She pressed them flat on the desk until they stopped. Through the glass wall at the end of the corridor, she could see Marco already on the phone, gesturing toward her current workspace with the particular efficiency of a man who received instructions and enacted them before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. She looked at the empty mug beside her monitor. She needed more coffee. She needed to be very, very careful about how she carried it. But mostly, underneath the fear that was doing its quiet, persistent work along the base of her spine, there was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time, something she didn't have a perfect word for. Not excitement, more like orientation, like a compass needle that had been spinning for years and had just, for the first time, stopped. She picked up her notepad. She walked toward her new desk. And somewhere on the 43rd floor, in a filing cabinet that had not yet been fully reviewed, a folder sat between 2 others that no one had yet thought to compare. 2 sets of external communication logs, dates that matched. Names that didn't align. A discrepancy so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't the specific kind of person who noticed footnotes and post-it noted them in offices where nobody expected to be watched. Evelyn Harper didn't know about that folder yet, but she would. The new desk smelled like someone else's ambition. It was a smaller workspace than her old one, a narrow anteroom between the elevator bank and Dante's office door. Barely enough room for a 2-drawer filing cabinet, a monitor, and the particular kind of loneliness that came from sitting at the center of something dangerous, without a clear map of its edges. Marco had the desk moved by 10:15. By 10:30, her files were transferred. By 11, she had learned that the anteroom had one additional feature her old workspace had lacked. She could hear through the heavy door to Dante's office, not the words but the quality of conversations, the temperature of them, whether they were running cold or hot. The first one she heard, at 11:40 that same Monday, was running very cold. She couldn't make out the voice on the other side. It was one of the men who had gone in 40 minutes earlier, and she had memorized his face from the visitor log without being asked to. Vincent Caruso, 51, Chief Operations Officer, 12 years with the organization, the kind of tenure that meant either exceptional loyalty or exceptional camouflage. She had written his name on her notepad when he entered. She had underlined it once, then thought better of that and erased the underline. The conversation lasted 6 more minutes. When Caruso came out, his face was arranged in the flat, controlled expression of a man who had been told something he didn't like and was deciding how to feel about it in private. He looked at Evelyn as he passed, directly, briefly, the way you look at a new piece of furniture to assess whether it will be a problem. And then he looked away and kept walking. She watched him until he turned the corner toward the elevators. She wrote nothing in her notepad, but she pressed the tip of her pen to the paper and held it there for a moment, making a small indentation in the page that wasn't a word or a mark, but was still, somehow, a record. By the end of that first week, Evelyn had developed what she privately called a topology of the 43rd floor. Not a map exactly, more like a sense of which spaces had pressure in them and which ones were just rooms. The conference room at the northeast end ran cold even when it was full, something about the way conversations in it ended before they were finished. The small kitchen beside the copy room ran warm. People talked there the way people talk in kitchens, the way mouths move more honestly when hands are doing something else, when someone is refilling coffee and not technically in a meeting. She started taking her lunch breaks in the kitchen. She brought a book, which was important. A book was permission to sit without conversing, without appearing to listen, without being present in any way that required acknowledgement. The book she brought was always the same one, a thick worn paperback she'd had since college, because nobody looks closely at a book someone has clearly already read. On the third day, she heard 2 junior analysts arguing in low, strained voices about an access code that had changed without notice, locking them out of a server partition they had previously used for routine reporting. One of them, young, wire-thin, with the particular anxiety of someone who suspects they're being watched but can't locate the camera, said, "Somebody moved the line and didn't tell us." The other one, older by maybe 5 years, with the weathered patience of someone who had stopped being surprised. "Lines move here all the time. The question is who moved it? And who benefits?" Silence. The sound of a microwave running. "Don't say that here," the older one said, quietly, like a door closing. Evelyn turned a page of her book. That evening she stayed late, after the floor had emptied, and spent 45 minutes reviewing the server access log she had been given clearance to see as part of her administrative role. The partition in question had been reassigned at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday 3 weeks prior. The administrative user ID attached to the reassignment was one she didn't recognize. She wrote it down. She wrote down the time, she wrote down the date, and then she looked at her calendar and found that 2:17 on that particular Tuesday morning was approximately 4 hours after Vincent Caruso had hosted a dinner at a private club in Midtown for 3 overseas business contacts whose names appeared nowhere in the Moretti Group's official client database. She sat with that for a while. Then she filed it, physically, in a manila folder and put the manila folder inside a fitness magazine she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk. Because nobody looks inside a fitness magazine that belongs to a woman who is visibly not using it. Us. On day 9, Dante called her into the office at 6 in the evening after everyone else had gone. The office at dusk was different from the office at morning. The city below had shifted into its nighttime registers. Lights coming up, the particular orange-gray of a Manhattan evening, everything softened at the edges. He was at the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and the absence of the jacket did something strange to the room's formality, made him look less like the composed cathedral-still man from the ballroom and more like a person who had been working for 11 hours and was still not done. There was a second chair pulled to the side of the desk, not the visitor chairs facing it, but beside it, angled toward the same view. A deliberate arrangement. "Sit," he said. She sat in the second chair. He slid a folder across the desk toward her. She opened it. 12 pages of financial movement, columns of numbers, wire transfers between accounts she didn't recognize, dates, institutions, amounts. "Tell me what you see," he said. She looked at it. She took her time. He didn't rush her, which she noted because most people rushed you when they knew the answer and were testing whether you'd find it. "This account," she said, putting her finger on a line 2/3 of the way down the third page. "It receives a transfer on the 14th of every month, but the amount changes each time by a very small percentage. Never a round number, never the same twice. That's not how you pay a vendor. Vendors have fixed contracts." She looked at the next page. "And this routing number? It's registered in a jurisdiction that doesn't require beneficial ownership disclosure, so whoever owns the receiving account doesn't have to be named anywhere. Go on." The amounts are small enough individually to avoid standard reporting thresholds. But if you add up every transfer across, she counted back through the pages. 7 months, you're looking at somewhere above $400,000 that has left the organization's accounts and gone to a place where its destination is legally invisible. She closed the folder. "This isn't embezzlement. Embezzlement is greedy. This is methodical. Someone is being paid regularly, carefully, for something ongoing." Dante was looking at her with the settled quality she had come to recognize as his version of close attention. "The account originated inside this organization," he said. "The person who set it up had level 4 financial clearance." There were 6 people on the 43rd floor with level 4 financial clearance. She knew their names because she had been quietly memorizing organizational structures since day 1 of her original 11 weeks, the way she memorized everything. Not for any specific reason, just because things mattered and you couldn't know in advance which things would matter most. "Caruso has level 4 clearance," she said. "So do 5 other people." "Yes." She looked at the folder. "But Caruso had dinner 3 weeks ago with people who aren't in your client database. Overseas contacts. I found the server access log entry from that night. A partition was reassigned at 2 in the morning, 4 hours after the dinner ended. The user ID attached to the access isn't one I can trace to any current employee record." She paused. "I have it written down. if you want it. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. You've been doing this on your own, he said. You asked me to use my eyes. I asked you to sit at a desk. Sitting at a desk is how I use my eyes. Something shifted in the quality of his expression. Not the almost smile from before, something less legible than that. He reached across the desk and picked up a pen and set it down again, the small fidget of a man who was not, despite appearances, entirely comfortable being surprised. The user ID, he said. She opened her notebook and read it to him. He wrote it on the inside cover of a different folder, not the one she'd seen, a new one, already on his desk, and closed it. Don't tell anyone what you found, he said. I haven't. Not Marco, not anyone. She looked at him. Not even Marco? A beat. Marco is loyal, he said, and the way he said it had a specific texture to it, a careful handling, like something he believed and was also paying attention to. But loyalty has geography. It covers what it covers. Keep your findings to yourself until I tell you otherwise. She nodded. She started to stand. The dinner, he said. The contacts. How did you find out about Caruso's dinner if it wasn't in any organizational calendar? She settled back into the chair. The building's service entrance log, she said. His car service booked a pickup at 11:45 p.m. that Tuesday. The destination was logged as Midtown. The duration of the booking implied he wasn't at the office. He'd left at 6 and the car didn't bring him back. I looked up the restaurant at that address range. Private club. Members only. Required a guest list request for event verification. You requested the guest list. I requested the event schedule as part of an administrative review I invented for the purpose, she said. I'm the executive secretary. Nobody questions administrative reviews. That's the thing about being underestimated. The paperwork always goes through. The city had gone fully dark behind him. The lights of it spread out in every direction, cold and brilliant and indifferent to everything happening in this room. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. You should too, she said, and then immediately pressed her lips together because that was absolutely not the kind of thing she should be saying to Dante Moretti. He looked at her. I mean, she started. Go home, Ms. Harper, he said, but the edge of something was in his voice that wasn't quite severity. She went home. The confrontation she had been sensing building in the hallways and conference rooms and careful silences of the 43rd floor finally broke surface on a Thursday, 12 days into her new desk assignment, at 9:15 in the morning, when Vincent Caruso walked into the anteroom and stopped in front of her desk and looked at her with the particular quality of attention that meant he had decided something. I need to see him, Caruso said. He didn't say good morning. He didn't say her name. He used the word him the way people use words when they're too angry to manage courtesy. Mr. Moretti is in a call until 10, she said. I need to see him now. He's unavailable until 10, she said, holding his eyes, keeping her voice level the way you keep a door level when someone is pushing on it. I can put you in the first slot after... I've been with this organization for 12 years. He said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd raised his voice. I built the operations structure that this company runs on. I was here when this floor was half the size it is now, and the man inside that office had 17 people in a bad lease in Chelsea. I don't wait for 10 o'clock. You do today, Evelyn said. He looked at her the way you look at something when you're recalibrating your assessment of it. Who put you here? He said. Mr. Moretti. Why? That's above my clearance level, she said. Would you like the 10 o'clock slot, or should I look at 10:30? He held her eyes for another 4 seconds. She counted them. 4 was a long time in that kind of silence. Then he turned and walked away. She waited until the sound of his footsteps had completely disappeared before she let out a breath. Her hands, flat on the desk, were steady. Her heart was not, but that was the heart's problem. She wrote the time in her notepad. She wrote Caruso. Confrontational, pressed for access. Didn't ask what the call was about, already knew there was one. She underlined that last part, then thought better of the underline again, and then left it. That afternoon, she made a mistake. Not a physical one. No spilled coffee, no dropped files, no heel caught in a grate. A different kind. The kind that came from moving too fast through a corridor because she was carrying 4 folders and a legal pad and trying to make it to the copy room before the machine went into its scheduled maintenance cycle, and she cut a corner too sharply and collided hard with a man coming out of the stairwell door. The folders went everywhere. The legal pad skidded under a credenza. The man, tall, late 40s, expensive haircut, a face she had seen before in meeting photos but couldn't immediately name, caught her by both arms to stop them both from going down. "Sorry," she started. "My fault," he said, which surprised her, because it wasn't, and men who came out of stairwell doors in buildings like this one were not typically in the habit of accepting fault. She crouched to gather the folders. He crouched too, which surprised her more, and handed her 2 of them. She glanced at the tabs as she took them back from him, routine client files, nothing sensitive, and then she looked at his face more closely. "Thank you," she said. "You're the new secretary," he said. 43rd floor. "Yes." "James Whitfield," he said. "Legal counsel, 3rd floor." She knew the name. It was on her organizational chart. More specifically, it was on a list she had compiled from 3 months' worth of meeting logs, a list of people who had attended, in various combinations, a series of informal gatherings that she couldn't classify as official meetings because they weren't on any calendar she could find. "Evelyn Harper," she said. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely decode, something professionally pleasant on the surface, something with more geography underneath. "You've been busy up here," he said. "It's a busy floor." "It is." He stood, and she stood, and he was still holding the legal pad, and he handed it to her with a small, precise motion. "Be careful," he said. "The copy machine on this floor jams if you use the lower tray. Use the middle one." She looked at him. "The copy machine," he said again pleasantly. "Notorious for it. Middle tray." "Thank you," she said. He nodded and walked back toward the stairwell door and went through it, and she stood in the corridor for a moment with her folders and her legal pad and the distinct sensation that the word careful had not been about the copy machine. She went to the copy room. She stood in front of the machine for a moment without pressing anything. Be careful. From a man who had been in 3 uncalendared meetings in the past 4 months. From a man whose name appeared in the same documentation as the invisible account numbers and the server partition reassignment and the overseas dinner that wasn't supposed to have happened. Warning. It had been a warning. But from which direction? Was Whitfield warning her away from what she was doing because she was getting close to something that would put her in danger? Or was he warning her because he was part of what she was investigating and he wanted her frightened enough to stop? She used the middle tray. She went back to her desk. She opened her notepad and she wrote Whitfield, and she sat with the pen hovering over the page for a long time before she wrote anything else. 3 days later, the files moved. Not all of them, just one. The manila folder inside the fitness magazine in the bottom drawer of her desk. The one with the server access log and the user ID and the timestamp from 2:17 in the morning. She opened the drawer at 8:50 on a Monday morning, and the magazine was there. And she opened the magazine and the folder was still inside it, and everything in the folder was still there. But the folder was upside down. She had placed it right side up. She was certain of this in the way she was certain of small details that other people dismissed. Not because she had made a deliberate effort to remember, but because her brain retained the orientation of placed objects, the way a tuning fork retains a pitch. The folder was upside down, which meant someone had removed it, opened it, replaced it, and put it back the wrong way. Her desk was locked when she left in the evening. She had the only key. She sat for a long moment looking at the upside-down folder, and then she closed the drawer, and she closed the magazine, and she sat very still with the specific cold feeling of understanding that she was not, as she had perhaps begun to assume, operating invisibly. She was being watched. Whatever she was doing, however careful she thought she had been, someone in this building was watching her do it. She picked up the phone and called Dante's direct line. "I need 5 minutes," she said when he picked up. "Now?" His voice was flat with early morning concentration. "Now," she said. "Please." A pause. "Come in." She gathered the magazine, folder inside, and walk through the connecting door. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was one of his primary skills. Not patience exactly, but the trained discipline of a man who had learned that most information arrives in the gaps, in what comes after the first sentence, in what people say when they stop preparing their words and just let them fall. When she finished, he said, "Show me." She opened the magazine. She placed the folder on his desk. She did not touch it, just let him see the orientation. He looked at it. He looked at her. "When did you last check it?" "Friday evening," she said. "Before I left. It was right side up." "Did anyone else have access to your desk this weekend?" "No. Building security has a master key, but the weekend log—" She stopped. "I haven't checked the weekend log." He picked up his phone. Not the desk phone, his personal cell, which she had never seen him use in front of her before. He typed something and sent it without speaking and put the phone back down. "Marco will pull it," he said. "If someone copied what's in that folder, Schmapbar," she started. "They already know we're looking," he said. And something in the way he said it, the we, how simply it arrived, no performance around it, made her chest do something she preferred not to examine too closely. "That changes the timeline," she said. "Yes. It means they're going to move faster now. Whatever they're planning, the leak, the coordination with whoever is outside, they'll accelerate because they know they've been noticed." She pressed her hands to her knees. "We need to know who. Before they do." He was looking at her with that gathered expression. "The account," he said. "The one receiving the monthly transfers. I had my own analyst run the user ID you gave me." He paused. "It traces back to a device registered to this building, 43rd floor, logged in from a terminal in this wing." She held very still. "There are 4 offices in this wing," she said. "3, he said. "One of them is mine." She looked at him. "Caruso," she said. "Caruso, Whitfield, and one other." He picked up the pen from his desk, turned it once. 3 people. One of them has been systematically feeding information to organizations that want to see this company destroyed, and has been doing it for months, and has now discovered that someone at the administrative level has noticed patterns they were careful to hide. He set the pen down. "Which means they're no longer patient. Patient people don't break into locked drawers and leave files upside down. That's not a message from a patient person." "It's a warning," she said, "like the copy machine." He went still. "What copy machine?" She told him about Whitfield in the corridor, all of it, the folders, the exact phrasing, the stairwell door, the 2 possible interpretations. She watched his face as she talked. He didn't interrupt. But somewhere in the middle of the story, something changed in his expression. Something moved through the composure like a current moving through still water, invisible at the surface, unmistakable if you knew how to look. When she finished, he said, "You didn't tell me this on Friday." "I wasn't sure what it meant on Friday." "You should have told me." "It wasn't sharp, but it had weight." "I'm telling you now." 3 days later, she looked at him directly. "I needed to understand it first." "That's not how this works," he said. "You tell me what you see when you see it, even if you don't understand it, especially then." She held his eyes. "With respect, you asked me to use my judgment. Judgment requires time to form. If I came to you with every half-processed observation I had, I would rather have 100 incomplete observations than one complete one that arrives 3 days late," he said. Still quiet. Still even. But the evenness had a different texture now, something underneath it that was not anger exactly, but the specific frustration of a man who was accustomed to being in control of his information and had just discovered a gap. A silence sat between them. "All right," she said, "immediately, from now on." He nodded, not satisfied exactly, recalibrated. "You should know," she said, "that if Whitfield was warning me, if he's not the source but knows who is, then there may be more than 3 people involved in this. The leak may have a protection structure around it. People who know and are staying quiet because they're afraid, not because they're participating." "That's a wider problem," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." He stood, which meant the meeting was over. She stood. She gathered the magazine. "Leave it," he said. "But I'll have Marco secure it. The chain of custody matters now." He came around the desk, and she was suddenly aware of how small the office felt when he moved through it, how the space reconfigured around him without his appearing to try. He stopped close enough that she could see the faint line of tiredness below his eyes again, the same quiet evidence of insufficient sleep that had been there since the first morning, and she understood suddenly that this was not a new condition. This was the permanent state of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had stopped noticing the weight. "You're not sleeping," she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's none of my—" "No," he said, not agreeing with her that it was none of her business. Something else. Something harder to classify. He looked at her for a moment in the way that had been accumulating meaning since the ballroom, since the handkerchief, since the word "we" that had come out of his mouth that morning with no effort, and she thought, this is the part where I should take a step back. She did not take a step back. "When this is over," he said, and then he stopped. Looked away toward the window. The morning city, hard and bright. When he looked back, the composure was fully returned, all the way down. "When this is over, I'll sleep." "Sure you will," she said. His mouth did the thing that was almost a smile. She left the office and went back to her desk, and she sat down and opened her notepad, and she wrote nothing for a full minute, just sat with the pen in her hand and the blank page, and the specific, dangerous awareness that the line between what she was doing here professionally and what was beginning to happen between them personally was getting harder to locate. She had been hired to notice things. She was noticing too many things, including the one she couldn't write down. The weekend log came back from Marco at 2 in the afternoon. She read it twice, then walked it into Dante's office without knocking, a new habit, recent and still slightly alarming to herself, and put it on his desk. He read it. He said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Saturday, 2:43 a.m., Master Key, Terminal C." Terminal C was the workstation outside Whitfield's office. She said, "Whitfield was at a client dinner in Boston on Saturday. I checked his calendar. He didn't return until Sunday evening." Meaning someone used Terminal C while Whitfield was out of the city. Meaning someone wanted it to look like Whitfield. Dante set the log down. He looked at the window, at the city. "Caruso," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "The overseas contacts from the dinner," he said. "I've identified 2 of them through separate channels. They represent a consortium that has been attempting to acquire controlling interest in 3 of our international subsidiaries through a series of minority stake purchases. Quiet, incremental. Nothing that triggered review thresholds." He turned from the window. If someone inside this organization is feeding them acquisition data, term sheets, valuation models, board meeting minutes, they have a roadmap to everything, every pressure point, every leverage opportunity. "They're not just leaking," she said. "They're providing a blueprint for dismantling this from the outside while the inside destabilizes." "Yes. And the suit," she said. "Saturday night, the gala." He looked at her. "You said you were carrying documents," she said. "In your jacket, the acquisition documents." "Draft merger terms," he said, "for a filing due Monday morning." "The collision was staged," she said. "I've been thinking about it since I told you. The service station was moved to create a specific sight line. If you stopped there, if someone drew your attention, if you turned, your jacket would be visible to anyone positioned at the right angle at the right moment with a camera." He said, "They photographed the documents through my jacket." "Through a wet jacket," she said. "Wine is transparent when it's saturated through thin fabric. If you know what you're looking for, if the resolution is good enough." "They have the merger terms," he said. "They've had them since the night of the gala." The room was very quiet. "The filing is Monday," he said. "Tomorrow. If they move before you file, if they use what they have to get ahead of the merger through a competing bid or a regulatory challenge, the deal falls apart," he said, "and the subsidiary it was designed to protect goes exposed." She had gone very still. "This was never just about information," she said. "It was about timing. They've been building toward one specific moment, the merger filing, and they've been inside this organization long enough and carefully enough that they're already in position. She looked at him. They're going to move tonight. Dante Moretti looked at her across the desk, and for one unguarded second, shorter than a breath, she saw behind the composure, down to the thing underneath. Not fear, not Dante Moretti, but the specific weight of a man who has just understood that the thing he has spent 12 years building is 24 hours away from being taken apart from the inside, and the only person in the room who might be able to help him is a woman who, until 3 weeks ago, had been best known for spilling beverages on important documents. He picked up his phone. He called Marco. And in the 43rd floor anteroom, in the bottom drawer of a desk that had already been violated once, in the fitness magazine that was no longer there, in all of that, something had already been set in motion that none of them could stop by standing still. The only question left was whether they could outrun it. Marco arrived in 4 minutes. That was the thing about Marco. He didn't materialize the way some of Dante's people did, all sudden presence and theatrical efficiency. He simply arrived, the way a wall arrives when you walk into it, solid and without ceremony, filling the doorway of the office with his specific density and waiting for instruction. Dante told him in 3 sentences: the overnight access, Terminal C, the merger documents. Marco said, "Who else knows?" "In this room," Dante said. Marco looked at Evelyn with the expression she had come to understand as his version of reassessment, not hostile, not warm, just the mechanical recalibration of a man updating his internal files. Then he looked back at Dante. "The filing team? Don't touch them yet. If anyone on that team is connected, alerting them alerts the whole network." Dante moved to the window, then stopped himself. She noticed that. The self-correction, the refusal to pace, the deliberate stillness of a man who had learned that how you moved in a room told people things you didn't want them to know. "We file tomorrow morning as scheduled. Nothing changes on the surface." "And underneath the surface," Marco said. "We find out tonight who walked through that door with a master key." Marco said, "Building security keeps camera footage for 72 hours before it cycles. Saturday was 61 hours ago. I'll pull it. Quietly. Always." Marco left. The door didn't slam. It never slammed. Marco was not a door-slamming man. It closed with the specific soft authority of something that meant business. Evelyn stood at the edge of the desk and said, "The cameras cover the stairwells? Every access point. Then we'll have a face." "We'll have a face," Dante said. "The question is whether the face is the one I'm expecting." She looked at him. "Caruso." He said nothing for a moment. Then, 12 years is a long time to watch someone, long enough to think you know the shape of their loyalty. He turned from the window. "I've been wrong before. I don't enjoy it." "Nobody enjoys being wrong about someone they trusted," she said. "I don't enjoy it twice," he said, and the way he said it, quiet, flat, with the particular texture of something that had already cost him, made her understand that this was not the first time. That there was a history to this man's relationship with betrayal that she was only seeing the current chapter of. She didn't ask about the previous chapters. She went back to her desk and waited. The footage came at 6:47 p.m. Marco brought it on a tablet, no printouts, nothing that could be left anywhere. He placed it on the desk and pressed play and stepped back, and Evelyn was called in, and the 3 of them stood in the low light of the office and watched a corridor camera's timestamp read 2:43 a.m. Saturday, and a figure move through the frame. The figure wore a building maintenance uniform, hat pulled low, head angled away from the camera with the deliberate practiced angle of someone who knew exactly where the lenses were. But the hands were wrong for maintenance. The hands were the hands of someone who did not do manual work. The way they moved to the keypad, the specific economy of the gesture, no hesitation, the entry of an access code from memory rather than from a card or a reference. One motion, practiced, the hands of a person who had used that code before. "Can you enhance the—" Evelyn started. "Already did," Marco said. He reached across and swiped to the next frame. A still image, extracted and sharpened, the best angle available, which was not good but was enough. The jaw, the set of the shoulders, the particular way the head tilted slightly right under stress, A tell she had seen in a conference room, in a corridor, in a confrontation across a desk that had lasted exactly 4 counted seconds. Evelyn's mouth went dry. "That's not Caruso," she said. The room held itself very still. Marco said nothing. Dante said nothing. She looked again at the image, at the jaw and the shoulders and the right tilted head, and she said it again because saying it once wasn't enough to make it real. "That's not Caruso." She looked at Dante. His face had done something she had not seen it do before. Not rage. Rage would have been easier to be in the room with. Something colder. Something that moved through the composure like a crack moves through stone, invisible for a long moment, and then suddenly, irrevocably, there. "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at the image again, the jaw, the shoulders. 12 years. The word loyal said with careful handling, like something he believed and was paying attention to simultaneously. "Marco," she said, and she heard her own voice come out steadier than she had any right to. "How long have you worked for Mr. Moretti?" The silence that followed was the longest she had experienced in that office. Marco said, 11 years. And before that? Another silence, different texture, the silence of a man deciding something. "Before that doesn't matter," Marco said. "It matters now," Dante said, and his voice was a room with all the furniture removed. "It matters right now, Marco." Marco looked at him. The two of them, Dante at the desk, Marco 2 feet from the door, held something between them that Evelyn could feel the shape of without being able to name it. Something old and structural, the specific weight of a relationship that had been load-bearing for a long time and was now being tested in a way that would determine whether it held or collapsed. "Sit down," Dante said. Marco did not sit down. "The consortium," Dante said. "The overseas contacts from Caruso's dinner. You ran the background check on those names last week when I asked you to. You had the full list." He paused. One breath. "2 of those names are in your personnel file, from before you came to me." Evelyn went absolutely still. "Associates," Marco said. The word came out careful, deliberate. The word of a man who had prepared for this conversation and was still not entirely ready for it. "From a long time ago, Before you what?" "Before I chose a different direction." "Did you?" Dante's voice had not changed in volume or temperature. That was the most frightening thing about it. The total architectural steadiness of it, the absence of any of the usual human signals that told you how close you were to the edge. Or did you choose to continue in the same direction from a position that gave you better access? Dante. Don't. One word. The flattest word she had ever heard a human being produce. Marco closed his mouth. "The merger documents," Dante said. "When I told you we were filing Monday, you were the first person in this building who knew, before the legal team, before the filing team. You." He picked up the tablet and looked at the image on it and put it back down. "Who did you call?" Marco's jaw moved. Once. The motion of a man who has constructed a version of this moment in his head many times and is finding that the real version is different from every construction. "I need you to understand," Marco said, "that what I did, the scope of it, it was limited. I controlled what they got. I kept—" "Who did you call?" The name Marco said was not Caruso. It was not Whitfield. It was a name Evelyn did not recognize, and from the way Dante received it, the single, almost imperceptible tightening at the corner of his mouth, the stillness becoming a different kind of stillness, she understood that he did recognize it, and that the recognition was the kind that rearranged things. "Reyes," Dante said. "Yes. Daniel Reyes has been attempting to acquire my international portfolio for 8 months. "Yes. And you have been his instrument inside this organization." Marco said, "It wasn't supposed to go this far. When it started, it was information, market information. Nothing that would what?" Dante stood. He was not a man who needed height or volume to be dangerous, but the standing had a quality to it, the full deployment of something that had been held in deliberate reserve. Nothing that would destroy what I spent 20 years building. Nothing that would expose my partners, compromise my people, endanger everyone in this organization who trusted me to keep them safe. His voice had not risen. It was perfectly, terrifyingly level. Nothing like that, Marco? I made choices I can't take back, Marco said. I know that. You made choices, Dante said. Yes. The air in the room was the kind that precedes weather, the specific atmospheric pressure of something large about to break. Evelyn did not move. She was aware of her own heartbeat with unusual clarity, the way you become aware of it when the rest of the noise drops away. She was also aware, on some parallel and very practical track, that she was standing in a room with two men, and one of them had just confessed to a betrayal that had been in motion for months, and the other one was the kind of man about whom the building's lower floors still spoke in careful, edited sentences. She was aware of the door. She was aware that the door was behind Marco. She was aware that she was not, despite recent evidence to the contrary, actually the kind of person who was equipped for this room right now. But she also did not move toward the door. How much does Reyes have? She said. Both men looked at her. The merger terms from the gala, she said, keeping her voice as level as she could manage. The partition data, whatever else has been transferred over the past months, how much of it has Reyes actually received and processed? Because there's a difference between what Marco passed to him and what Reyes has been able to act on. If the merger filing is tomorrow morning and Reyes is planning to move tonight, he needs to have already converted the information into a competing position. Has he? She looked at Marco. You controlled what they got. That's what you said. So tell us what you held back. Marco looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't fully classify. Something between the exhaustion of a man at the end of a very long road and something that might, in different circumstances, have been respect. The valuation models, he said. For the 3 subsidiaries, I gave him the structure, but not the numbers. Reyes knows the shape of the deal. He doesn't know the pricing. He paused. Without the pricing, his competing bid would be approximate. He'd be guessing at the floor. But he still has the merger terms, Dante said. The draft from my jacket. The draft, Marco said, not the final. The draft had placeholder numbers in 2 of the 3 annexes. I know that because He stopped. Because I reviewed the document before the gala. The placeholders hadn't been finalized yet. Evelyn looked at Dante. So, Reyes has structure without substance. He can see the frame of the deal, but not what fills it. He can still block it, Dante said. He doesn't need precise numbers to file a regulatory challenge or approach the counterparties directly. Uncertainty alone is enough to delay the filing, and delay kills this deal as surely as a competing bid. Then we don't give him time to create uncertainty, she said. We file tonight. Dante looked at her. The filing window opens at midnight, she said. I know because I processed the submission package for the legal team, and the cover sheet lists the earliest eligible window. If we file at midnight instead of Monday morning, Reyes loses his timing. Everything he's planned is built around a Monday morning filing. That's the window he's been preparing to move in. We take the window away. The legal team would need to complete the final annexes, Dante said. Tonight. How long? 3 hours? Maybe 4. It's 6:58, she said. That gives us until midnight. Dante looked at Marco. Marco looked at the floor. The legal team, Dante said to Marco. Quiet. Final. Who on it reports to you? A pause. No one directly. But Whitfield knows. Whitfield is aware that Reyes has an interest. I told him 6 weeks ago. He's not a participant. He's been sitting with it. Sitting with it, Dante said. He's scared, Marco said. He's not corrupt. He's scared. That's a distinction that matters a great deal to Whitfield and very little to me right now. Dante turned to Evelyn. Get Whitfield, not by phone, in person. Bring him here. She was already moving. Whitfield was in his office on the 3rd floor, which surprised her. She had half expected him to be gone. The building felt like a place where people were quietly disappearing. But he was there, jacket on, tie still knotted at 6:59 p.m., sitting at his desk with the particular alertness of a man who had been waiting for something to happen and had recently begun to suspect it was happening now. He looked up when she opened his door. She said, 43rd floor, now. Mr. Moretti is asking. His face did several things in rapid succession. Then he stood, picked up nothing from his desk, no briefcase, no files, no phone, which told her he already knew he was walking into something he couldn't prepare documents for. He came around the desk and followed her without asking a single question, which told her something else. He already knew what this was about. In the elevator, she watched the floor numbers rise and said, "The copy machine warning. What were you actually telling me?" Whitfield looked at the elevator doors. "I was telling you to be careful," he said. "Of Marco." A pause. "I didn't know the extent of it. I knew something was wrong, and I knew Marco was adjacent to it. I didn't know how adjacent." He looked at his own hands. "I told myself if nobody asked me directly, I hadn't lied." "That's a very lawyerly construction," she said. "I'm a lawyer," he said. "We build things out of language and call them shelter." The elevator opened. The meeting that followed in Dante's office was the kind that stripped language down to its load-bearing elements. Whitfield sat. He saw Marco. Something in his face confirmed everything, and he said simply, "Ah," which was the most economical expression of understanding Evelyn had ever witnessed. Dante said, "The final annexes for the merger filing. You have what you need to complete them." Whitfield said, "By when?" 11:30. Whitfield looked at his watch, looked at Marco, looked back at Dante. "All right," he said. Not agreement exactly. More like a man stepping off a ledge he had been standing on too long. "I'll need my associate, and the filing credentials." "You'll have both," Dante said. "You'll work from this floor tonight. You don't leave this floor until the filing is confirmed." Whitfield nodded. He stood. He paused at the door. He looked at Marco. Not with anger. The anger would come later, or maybe it wouldn't come at all. Maybe what was there instead was something sadder and more permanent than anger. "You should have talked to me," he said, "before it got here." Marco said nothing. Whitfield left. The hours that followed had the quality of a controlled burn, everything moving within very tight parameters, the heat contained but absolutely present, the knowledge that any break in the containment would mean something irreversible. Dante worked the phones from his office, quietly, systematically, building a structure around the filing that Reyes couldn't see. Not security, exactly, but redundancy. Multiple confirmation channels, enough parallel verification that if any single point was compromised, the others held. Evelyn sat at the anteroom desk and coordinated communication between Whitfield's temporary workspace and the filing system and Dante's direct line, moving information from one place to another with the specific, focused precision of someone who understood that every minute mattered and wasted none of them. She did not spill anything. She did not knock anything over. Her hands were completely, unusually steady. Marco sat in the corner of Dante's office in a chair that had been brought in for no other purpose, because Dante had looked at him after Whitfield left and said, "You don't leave my sight until this is filed." Marco had sat down and had not spoken again, and had not tried to leave, and Evelyn thought that this, perhaps, was the most honest thing Marco had done in 11 years. The willingness to sit with the weight of what he'd done in the presence of the person he'd done it to. At 9:43, her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it for one ring. Two. She picked it up. "Ms. Harper." A man's voice. Smooth, accented slightly, the faint architecture of Spanish under practiced American English. "We haven't been formally introduced. My name is Daniel Reyes." The bottom of her stomach dropped about 3 inches. She kept her voice completely level. "I don't recognize this number," she said. "How did you get this line?" "The same way I get most things," Reyes said pleasantly, "through someone who had access." She looked at the open door of Dante's office. She could see the edge of his desk, his hand, the pen. She did not stand up. She did not change her posture. She picked up her notepad and wrote the name Reyes and underlined it once and turned the notepad so that if Dante looked up, he could read it. He looked up. He read it. He did not move. "What do you want, Mr. Reyes?" she said. "To be helpful," he said. "I'm calling because I want you to understand something, Ms. Harper. The organization you're currently working very hard to protect. I'm not trying to destroy it. I'm trying to acquire it. Those are different things. Destruction is messy. Acquisition is orderly, and what I'm offering Mr. Moretti, if he would take a moment to consider it rather than having his secretary scramble to file paperwork at midnight. I'm listening, she said. In the office, Dante had gone very still. A conversation, Reyes said. Tonight. Dante and I, in person. No lawyers, no filings, no midnight deadlines. A conversation between two men who have both built things and understand what it costs. He paused. Tell him that if he files tonight, I will challenge the filing on 3 separate regulatory grounds within 24 hours. I have the documentation ready. I have the connections in place. The filing will be delayed 6 to 8 months minimum, and during that delay, the subsidiary he's trying to protect will be exposed long enough for me to acquire minority positions in all 3 of its dependent holdings. Another pause. But if he comes to the table tonight, I withdraw the challenges. The filing proceeds uncontested Monday morning, and we discuss a partnership structure that benefits both sides. Evelyn wrote on the notepad as he spoke, not every word, just the structure of the threat and the offer, the shape of it. I'll convey the message, she said. I assumed you would, Reyes said. You're good at your job, Ms. Harper. Better than he knows, I think. But then, people tend to underestimate the person managing their calendar, until it's too late. The line went dead. She set the phone down. She looked at the notepad. She stood and walked into the office and put the notepad on Dante's desk and said, He has regulatory contacts in place. He says the challenges are already drafted. He's offering a meeting instead. Dante read what she had written. Marco, from his corner, said, Reyes doesn't bluff. If he says the challenges are ready... I didn't ask you, Dante said. Flat. Final. Marco subsided. Dante read the notepad again. He turned it over and placed it face down on the desk, a gesture with something almost ritualistic about it, the deliberate setting aside of information in order to think around it rather than through it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, How did he get your number? He said through someone with access. Marco doesn't have your direct line. No, she said. He doesn't. She looked at him. Which means there's someone else. The room processed this together, and it was a particular kind of processing, the cold, arriving comprehension of people who thought they had identified the wound and have just discovered it goes deeper. Whitfield, Dante said. Whitfield has my number. He's had it since my first week. Bis. She thought about the corridor, the copy machine, the warning that was a warning, and also perhaps something else. A report. An update. A position check. She pressed the thought down, examined it. Or someone who had access to building communications. How many people have access to building communications? On this floor? She thought about it. 12. But access to the external relay, the one that would show individual extension numbers rather than the building's main line, that's a much smaller group. She thought. 3 people with that level of access. You, Marco. She stopped. And? Dante said. The building's communications administrator, she said, who reports to operations. Which Caruso runs, Dante said. Which Caruso runs, she said. Caruso, who I was convinced was the source and then wasn't. Caruso, who may not be the source but may be adjacent to it, the way Whitfield was adjacent. Dante stood abruptly and went to the window, and this time he didn't stop himself from moving. He went to the glass and stood with his back to the room and looked at the city. And for the first time in all the time she had been in this building, she saw, in the set of his shoulders, something she had not expected to see. Not rage, not calculation, but the specific, profound exhaustion of a man who has maintained total control for a very long time and has just discovered that the architecture of his world has more fault lines in it than he knew. She did not look away. She let herself see it. She thought he deserved to be seen, even in this. He said, still facing the window, My father built this organization on the principle that loyalty was the only currency that held its value. A long pause. I spent 20 years believing the same thing. She said nothing. Marco was my, He stopped, started again. There is no word for what Marco was. Not a word I'm willing to say in front of a witness right now. She understood. She didn't push. He turned back to the room. The exhaustion had been replaced, or covered, or compressed back beneath the surface. She couldn't tell which. The composure was there again, but it was thinner now. She could see through it in a way she hadn't been able to before, and she thought that this was either a sign of trust or a sign of crisis, and possibly both. "We meet with Reyes," he said. She said, "That's what he wants." "I know what he wants," Dante said, "and I know what I'm going to give him, which is not the same thing." He looked at Marco. "You're going to help me." Marco raised his eyes. "Not because I forgive you," Dante said, "because you owe me something that forgiveness doesn't cover. You're going to tell me everything Reyes doesn't know I know, every piece of information you held back, every gap between what you told him and what is actually true." He moved to the desk. "And then we're going to walk into that meeting and let Reyes believe he has already won, because the most dangerous thing in the world is a man who thinks he has won before the game is finished." Marco said, "And after?" Dante looked at him. "After tonight," Marco said. "What happens?" "After tonight," Dante said, "depends entirely on what you give me between now and then. Don't ask me for mercy. Give me something to work with, and we'll see what the morning looks like." It was the most honest negotiation Evelyn had ever witnessed. She looked at the clock. 10:14. She said, "If we're meeting Reyes, we need a location. Neutral ground. His call or ours?" "Ours," Dante said immediately. "We choose the ground." "The Whitmore Club," she said. "7th floor private dining. It's Moretti Group territory. You've hosted events there. The staff knows your people. Reyes won't know the room the way we know the room." Dante looked at her with that quality of attention that still, even now, after weeks of it, did something to her equilibrium. "Call them," he said. 11 p.m. She picked up the phone, and underneath all of it, underneath the filing and the regulatory threats and the man in the corner of the office who had been 11 years of loyalty and 8 months of something else, underneath the phone call she was making and the room she was booking and the controlled forward-moving momentum of necessary action, underneath all of it was the thing she could not quite contain. Not fear. She had moved through the fear already and come out the other side of it into something harder and cleaner. What she couldn't contain was the understanding that had arrived sometime in the past hour, somewhere between Reyes's voice on the phone and the moment she had watched Dante's shoulders carry the weight of everything he had built and everything that was threatening to take it from him. The understanding that she was no longer in this building because of her mother's medical bills, or her salary, or the professional obligation she had constructed careful arguments around. She was in this building because of him. And that was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her yet. The phone rang twice on the other end. The Whitmore Club's concierge answered. She booked the room. She looked at the clock, 10:17. 43 minutes to build a trap for a man who thought he had already won. She had spilled wine in front of 500 people and walked into the lion's den and kept records nobody asked her to keep and sat in rooms where the air was made of threat. And she was still here, still upright, still holding a pen and a notepad and the thin, bright thread of a plan that had not yet finished forming. She looked at Dante. He was already looking at her. "Tell me what you need," she said. He told her, and she began. The Whitmore Club's 7th floor smelled like old wood and older money. The particular combination of leather and beeswax and the accumulated quiet of 100 years of conversations that were never supposed to leave the room. Evelyn had been here once before, 18 months ago, for a different job's end-of-year function, and she remembered thinking then that the building existed in a different relationship with time than the rest of Manhattan. Slower, denser, the way amber is denser than air. She was not thinking about amber now. She was standing in the private dining room at 10:53, watching 2 of Dante's security men position themselves with the particular casual precision of people trained to look like furniture, and going over the plan in her head for the 4th time in 40 minutes, checking it the way you check a knot before you put your weight on it. The room had one entrance, one set of windows, north-facing, 7th floor, non-operable. A table that seated 12, currently set for 4. The kitchen access was behind a service door to the left of the credenza, and she had spent 10 minutes with the club's manager establishing that the service staff would remain behind that door until called, no exceptions, because what was about to happen in this room was not something she wanted witnessed by people whose discretion she couldn't verify. Dante was at the far end of the table, standing, jacket on, the full reconstruction of his composure so complete that if you hadn't seen the moment at the window in his office, the shoulders, the weight, you would have no evidence it had ever happened. He was reviewing something on his phone with the focused stillness of a man who had converted everything that had occurred in the past 4 hours into fuel and was burning it cleanly. Marco sat in a chair against the wall, not at the table, not a participant, a resource. He had given them everything in the car on the way over. 40 minutes of information delivered in the flat, exhausted voice of a man emptying his pockets at a border crossing, knowing that what he was surrendering was the last thing he had to bargain with. The gaps between what he'd told Reyes and what was true. The timeline of the transfers. The specific language Reyes's people had used when they thought they were directing Marco and were in fact being directed by their own assumptions. The name of the regulatory official Reyes had cultivated for the challenge filing, the bank through which the competing bid would be financed. Evelyn had written all of it down. She now knew Daniel Reyes's plan more precisely than Reyes knew it himself, because she knew where his information was wrong, and wrong information believed with complete confidence was not an advantage. It was a detonator waiting for the right weight. Her phone read 10:58. The door opened. Reyes was younger than his voice had suggested. Mid-40s, lean, the kind of tan that came from actual sun rather than any artificial process, wearing a suit that was understated in the particular way that very expensive things are understated, the way that makes other expensive things look like they're trying. He came in alone, which told her something. Either he was genuinely confident enough not to need visible backup, possible, or his backup was somewhere she couldn't see, more likely. He looked at the room. He looked at the security men who were pretending to be furniture. He looked at Marco against the wall, and his expression registered Marco's presence with a single, brief flicker of something. Recalibration, she thought, or the management of surprise. And then he looked at her. He stopped. "I was expecting to meet with Dante directly," he said. "You are," she said. "I'm here because Mr. Moretti finds it useful to have an accurate record of conversations." Reyes looked at the notepad in her hand. He looked at her face. He did the thing she had seen men in this building do repeatedly in the past 11 weeks. The rapid, reflexive assessment of a woman in a professional context, the summary dismissal, the conclusion that she was peripheral. He let it show, which was his first mistake. "Ms. Harper," Dante said from the end of the table. She moved to the chair to his right and sat. Reyes came to the table and sat across from them, and the room arranged itself into the specific geometry of a negotiation where both sides knew that what was being negotiated was not the thing being discussed. "Dante," Reyes said. He used the first name the way you use a word in a language that isn't yours, correctly, but with the slight, audible awareness that you're using it. "Daniel," Dante said. A pause. The room held its breath. "I want you to know," Reyes said, "that nothing I've done has been personal. I want to be clear about that from the start." "Nothing is ever personal," Dante said. "Until it is." Reyes smiled. It was a good smile, practiced, warm enough to register as genuine, careful around the edges. "I've been watching the Moretti Group for 3 years. The international subsidiaries specifically. You've built something genuinely impressive." He placed his hands flat on the table, open, visible, the body language of a man presenting his reasonableness. "What I'm proposing isn't a takeover. It's a merger of strategic interests. The consortium I represent has capital access that your current structure can't match, and distribution networks in 4 markets where you've been trying to establish presence for years." "You've been building this offer for 3 years," Dante said, "and your strategy for bringing me to the table was to compromise my organization from within." "My strategy," Reyes said, with the particular smoothness of someone who has done extensive preparation, was to demonstrate that the alternative to partnership is considerably more costly than partnership. That's not compromise. That's leverage. "You used my people," Dante said. "One person," Reyes said. He didn't look at Marco. "And that person made his own choices. Across 8 months. long enough to establish that the vulnerabilities I identified were real and exploitable, which suggests with respect that your security structure had problems I didn't create. It was well delivered. Evelyn would give him that. It was the kind of argument that sounded like an observation but functioned like a blade, designed to redirect culpability, to make the target feel that defending himself was the same as admitting fault. She wrote nothing on the notepad. She was watching his hands. "The regulatory challenges," Dante said. "You said they're ready." "Documentation filed with my legal team," Reyes confirmed. 3 separate grounds. I can initiate within 24 hours of the filing window opening. "And your financing for a competing bid?" "Secured," Reyes said, "through a structure that your organization's current advisors won't be able to untangle quickly enough to block." He tilted his head slightly, not arrogance, something more like candor, the performance of candor. "I'm not here to threaten you, Dante. I'm here because I genuinely believe that what I'm offering is better for the organization than what you'd face if I exercise these options. I'd rather have this conversation than a legal war." Dante looked at him for a long moment. "You know what I find interesting," Dante said, "about men who say they don't want a war while they're showing you their weapons?" Reyes waited. "They always assume," Dante said, "that you haven't already looked at their ammunition." The room shifted. Not visibly. Nothing moved. But Evelyn felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure, the moment when the surface of something breaks, and what's underneath becomes the conversation. She opened the notepad. She said, "Your regulatory contact is Arthur Venn, Assistant Director, Filing Oversight Division, appointed 14 months ago. He has a relationship with the Reyes Consortium that predates his appointment by approximately 2 years." She looked at the notepad as though she were reading from it. Though what she had written was only partial, she was delivering the rest from memory, the way she always did. "The challenge filing you've described relies on 3 grounds: procedural deficiency in the subsidiary valuation methodology, undisclosed conflict of interest among the Moretti Group's board advisors, and incomplete jurisdictional disclosure for the international components of the merger." She looked up. "You drafted the challenge documentation based on the merger terms your agent photographed at the Ashford Grand Gala 3 weeks ago, specifically the draft document that Dante carried in his jacket pocket." Reyes had gone very still. She continued, "The draft had placeholder values in Annexes B and C, pending final actuarial review. The challenge filing you've prepared is built on those placeholder values, not the final figures. The final figures were completed last Thursday and differ from the placeholders in both annexes by a margin large enough to invalidate all 3 of your regulatory grounds." She set the pen down. "Your filing will be dismissed within 72 hours of submission, possibly faster, because Arthur Venn was placed on administrative review this afternoon following an anonymous submission to the Oversight Board's Internal Ethics Office." She paused. "That submission was made at 4:37 p.m. today." Reyes looked at her, then at Dante, then at the table, then back at her. "At the financing structure," Evelyn said, "routed through the Leland Marsh private credit facility in the Cayman registration. That facility has a covenant that prohibits its use in any acquisition target where the acquiring party has a documented record of corporate intelligence violations in the preceding 12 months. She looked at him steadily. "Marco provided us with documentation of every information transfer he facilitated over the past 8 months. Complete chain of custody, timestamps, amounts, receiving parties. It constitutes a documented record of corporate intelligence violations." She picked up the pen again. "The financing is void." The silence was total. Reyes sat with the expression of a man who has walked into a room he designed and found that the furniture had been moved. He said, after a very long moment, "You did this tonight." "We did it tonight," Dante said. Reyes looked at Marco. Something moved across his face. Not betrayal exactly, because betrayal required a foundation of trust that had never actually existed between them, but something adjacent to it, the particular cold recognition of having been used in a way you thought you were controlling. "You turned him," Reyes said. "He turned himself," Dante said. "I just gave him a direction." Reyes breathed out slowly. He placed both palms flat on the table again, the same open gesture as before, but it meant something different now. It was no longer the display of reasonableness. It was the gesture of a man taking inventory of what he had left. The merger still files, Dante said. Tonight, as scheduled. Your challenges don't proceed. Your financing is unavailable. He leaned forward slightly. So let's talk about what we're actually negotiating, because it isn't a partnership. Well, Reyes looked at him. You have 3 subsidiaries attempting to acquire minority stakes in my international holdings. Quiet, incremental, under review threshold. I want those positions unwound. Dante's voice was perfectly even, the way a very sharp thing is perfectly still. All 3. Complete divestiture within 60 days. In exchange, I don't submit Marco's documentation to the relevant authorities, which means your consortium's principals avoid the specific kind of regulatory scrutiny that tends to be difficult to recover from. A pause. That's the conversation. The room held. Reyes looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window, north-facing, 7th floor, and Evelyn watched him go through the same process she had watched Dante go through in a different room. The internal accounting of what remained, the cold assessment of the number at the bottom of the invoice versus the number in the account. 60 days is aggressive, Reyes said. It is, Dante agreed. 90. 75, Dante said. And you pull your people out of my building, anyone Reyes consortium placed, recruited, or retained, full list in writing by Wednesday. Another long pause. I'll need that in a formal document, Reyes said. Whitfield is drafting it currently, Dante said. It will be ready before you leave this room. Reyes looked at him for a moment with an expression that was, beneath the professional exterior, something surprisingly unguarded. The look of a man who had spent 3 years building a particular kind of sophisticated pressure campaign and had just discovered that the target had spent the last 4 hours assembling a precision instrument designed to dismantle it. You knew, Reyes said, about Venn, the financing covenant, the placeholder values. He looked at Evelyn. How long? She said, long enough. Reyes looked at her with an expression that had changed register completely from the one he'd walked in with. The rapid dismissal was gone, replaced by something she found oddly more comfortable to be on the receiving end of, because it was at least accurate. You work fast, Ms. Harper. I work carefully, she said. Sometimes it looks the same. He almost smiled. It was not the practiced smile from earlier. It was smaller and more real. He looked back at Dante. Send me the document. Dante picked up his phone and sent a text, and 4 minutes later the service door opened and Whitfield came in carrying a 4-page document that he placed in front of Reyes without speaking, because Whitfield was a lawyer and understood that the addition of words at this juncture would help no one. Reyes read it, slowly, with the focused attention of a man who had not gotten where he was by signing things he hadn't fully read. He asked 2 questions about specific language in paragraph 3. Dante answered both, briefly, and Whitfield modified the language on a second copy with a pen, initialed the change, and slid it back. Reyes picked up the pen. He signed. Dante signed. Whitfield witnessed. Evelyn looked at the clock on the wall. 11:49, 11 minutes to midnight. We're done, Dante said. Reyes stood. He picked up his copy of the document. He looked around the room, at Marco against the wall, at the security men who were no longer pretending to be furniture, at Evelyn with her notepad, at Dante. And he said with something that was almost not quite, but almost admiration. If I'd known what I was walking into, I would have brought better ammunition. No, Dante said. You would have brought the same. You just would have been angrier about the outcome. Reyes left. The door closed. For about 4 seconds, the room simply existed. Then Whitfield sat down heavily in the nearest chair and said, Christ, which was the most emotional Evelyn had seen him. Dante was already on his phone sending something to the legal filing team, the pre-prepared package that had been assembled over the past 3 hours waiting for this moment, the merger documents complete and verified and ready for submission the instant the midnight window opened. Evelyn looked at her notepad. The pages were dense with her handwriting. Not organized, not clean, the working notes of someone processing information at speed, full of arrows and crossed-out words and small, decisive underlines. She looked at the last page and saw that at some point in the past hour, without entirely realizing she was doing it, she had written 75 days in the margin with a small box drawn around it, and inside the box she had written a question mark. She didn't know why. She crossed it out. Her phone buzzed. A notification from the filing system's automatic confirmation service. She looked at it. Midnight. Filed. Confirmed. She showed it to Dante. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said nothing. But something in his face, specific, private, directed entirely at her, said enough. They were in the elevator going down at 12:14 when the second phone rang. Not her phone. Dante's personal cell, the one she'd only seen him use once. He looked at the screen and something happened in his expression that she recognized by now. The composure engaging, the specific buttoning down that meant the incoming information was bad. He answered, listened, said, when? Listened, said, how many? Listened. He hung up. He looked at the elevator doors. There's a problem, he said. She waited. The filing went through, he said. The document we signed with Reyes is valid. The regulatory challenges are dead. He paused. But Reyes wasn't working alone in the way we thought. The consortium has a secondary arm, separate from the financing structure, separate from the regulatory strategy. He looked at her. A physical component. The elevator hit the lobby, and the doors opened, and he stepped out, and she stepped out with him, and they were moving across the lobby before she fully processed what he had said. Physical, she said. The international component of the merger, he said, his voice low, his pace steady, Marco and 2 security men materializing around them from positions she hadn't seen them take up. It involves 3 co-signatories from overseas partners who are flying in for the formal closing ceremony, Monday morning, Ashford Grand. He looked at her. My security team just got intelligence from an outside source that there is a coordinated plan to disrupt the ceremony, not legally, not regulatorily. She understood what he meant by not legally and not regulatorily. Your source, she said. Reliable. How reliable? He looked at her directly. As reliable as anything I have left. She kept moving. Lobby doors, cold night air. His car at the curb, the door already open. Someone already inside running through something on a phone. Who else knows about the ceremony details, she said. Beyond the obvious people. The guest list, the location, the timing, it was in the merger terms. He stopped at the car. Looked at her. The draft. That Reyes photographed. That Reyes photographed. She looked at him. The document we signed tonight doesn't cover this, she said. Reyes signed away the acquisition strategy. He didn't sign away whatever this secondary arm is doing because we didn't know about it when we drafted the agreement. No, Dante said. We didn't. Which means, he said, that in approximately 41 hours, 3 of my international partners are going to walk into a closing ceremony that someone has already mapped and planned and prepared to disrupt in a way that has nothing to do with regulatory filings. The night was cold and clear, and Manhattan was doing what Manhattan always did, existing at full volume, indifferent, enormous, the traffic and the lights and the vertical geometry of buildings that never apologized for how high they went. She stood at the car door and looked at him, and understood that this was the moment she had been moving toward since the ballroom, since the spilled wine, since the handkerchief, and the 5 words, it's only a suit, not the negotiation, not the filing, this. The moment after the plan succeeded and the new, worse problem arrived, and the only question was whether you ran or you stayed. The ceremony, she said, can it be moved? The co-signatories land at JFK tomorrow at 6 a.m., different carriers, different terminals. By the time they're on the ground, any change to the venue is, logistically, he stopped, shook his head. Not impossible, but complex enough that the coordination risk is almost as high as the original risk. So we don't move the ceremony, she said. No. We change what happens inside it. She looked at the car, looked back at him. I need the full guest list, the venue floor plan, and whatever your source knows about the disruption. Timeline, Number of people, method if known. She paused. And I need Marco. He looked at her. I know, she said. But he knows Reyes's operation better than anyone we have right now, and he's motivated. Marco is sitting in your car because you haven't decided what to do with him yet, which means he's available. She held his eyes. Use what's in front of you. A beat. He looked at the car, looked back at her. He said, You're not afraid of any of this. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. I'm terrified, she said. I've been terrified since the ballroom. But I've noticed that being terrified and being useful aren't mutually exclusive, so I've been trying to focus on the second one. He looked at her with the gathered expression, the chess player's eyes, and something underneath them that she had been carefully not examining too closely for 3 weeks, and was finding it increasingly difficult to maintain that policy about. He said, Get in the car. She got in the car. Marco was in the far seat, looking at no one. The security man in the front passenger seat was on a phone. The city moved past the windows. She opened her notepad to a clean page. The floor plan first, she said to Dante. Then the guest list. Then whatever your source has on the method. We'll work backward from the most likely point of entry. He looked at her for a moment in the back seat dark. You reorganized the third floor's filing system, he said, because something felt wrong. Yes. You put a post-it on a footnote. Yes. You filed things in a fitness magazine because nobody looks inside a fitness magazine. Yes. He looked out the window, the city, then back. I hired you because I needed someone who notices things. I know, she said. I didn't understand yet, he said. What kind of things? She held the pen above the clean page. The floor plan, she said. He took out his phone. And in the Ashford Grand Ballroom, 41 hours away, something was already in motion that had no paperwork, no regulatory structure, no signed agreement to constrain it. Something that had been put in place by people who understood that when the elegant strategies failed, you moved to the ones that weren't elegant at all. It was moving. And somewhere in its mechanism, in the timing, in the positioning, in the specific choreography of what was planned for Monday morning in the room where Evelyn had first spilled wine on Dante Moretti's $11,000 suit, there was a gap. She was going to find it. She pressed the pen to the page. She began. The floor plan arrived at 1:17 in the morning, sent from a secure line belonging to someone whose name Dante didn't share and Evelyn didn't ask for, because she had learned in the past 3 weeks that there were categories of information that arrived through doors she wasn't supposed to see, and the most useful thing she could do was work with what came through them, rather than asking about the architecture. She spread the Ashford Grand's 7th floor event layout across the back seat between them. A digital rendering, detailed, the kind that facilities managers used for catering logistics and seating arrangements, showing every service entrance, every corridor junction, every load-bearing column and decorative partition in the Grand Meridian room where the closing ceremony was scheduled for Monday at 11 a.m. She looked at it for 40 seconds without speaking. Then she said, There are 3 service entrances. 2 are standard kitchen and catering access. The 3rd is here. She put her finger on the northeast corner of the diagram. It connects to the building's freight elevator, which runs separately from the main elevator bank. It has its own key system, and it's not monitored by the same security network as the public areas. Marco, from the far seat, said, That's how they'll come in. She looked at him. Reyes's secondary arm, Marco said. He was looking at the floor plan with the expression of a man recognizing a landscape he had seen from a different angle. They don't do frontal. They never do frontal. They use the infrastructure, the parts of a building that the building's own security stops thinking about because they've been there too long. He looked up. The freight elevator, the northeast service entrance. That's the entry point. How many? Dante said. My best estimate, 4, maybe 5. Enough to create sufficient disruption in a confined space without needing a large footprint going in. Marco's voice had the flat, exhausted quality of someone delivering intelligence they wish they didn't have. They won't be armed in a way that sets off the building's external screening. The event has private security at the main entrance, magnetometers, bag check, but the freight access bypasses all of that. So they bring in what they need through the freight entrance, Evelyn said. Yes. She looked at the floor plan. She traced the freight corridor from the northeast service entrance to the Grand Meridian room. It ran behind the kitchen, past the wine storage, along the back wall of the event space. There was a service door that opened directly into the room's northwest corner, behind the head table, behind where the co-signatories would be seated for the formal ceremony. They'd come in behind the table, she said. During the signing, Dante said, maximum disruption, maximum visibility. The ceremony is the moment. Which means they need to know exactly when the signing begins, she said. They need someone inside the room with a line of communication to the team in the freight corridor. She looked at the guest list Dante had pulled up on his phone and handed to her. 41 names, co-signatories, their legal representatives, Moretti Group executives, venue staff assigned to the event, 2 representatives from the financial institution overseeing the merger escrow. She read through it with the focus she applied to footnotes and filing systems, not looking for what stood out, looking for what sat too quietly. Your co-signatories' legal representatives, she said. How were they chosen? Each co-signatory retains their own counsel, Dante said. I don't control those appointments. One of the legal reps on this list was appointed within the past 3 months, she said. She showed him the name. The others have relationships with their respective clients going back years. This one, recent appointment, right around the time Reyes's consortium began its minority stake acquisition attempts. The car was quiet. A plant, Marco said. A plant, Evelyn said. Inside the room. Someone who can watch the signing begin and make a signal. She looked at the floor plan again. We can't remove them without alerting the co-signatory. And alerting the co-signatory this close to the ceremony creates exactly the uncertainty Reyes was trying to generate by other means. She pressed the pen to the page. We have to let them come in. We have to let the ceremony proceed normally until the moment they're committed. Fully committed, in the freight corridor. No exit that doesn't expose them. And then we close it. Dante looked at her. You want to use the ceremony as the trap, he said. The ceremony is already the trap, she said. Reyes built it. We're just changing who it catches. They worked through the night, not in the car, in the 43rd floor office, which by 2:30 in the morning had the particular atmosphere of a room that had stopped being a professional space and become something more honest. Coffee cups on the desk, Dante had always kept clear, jackets over chairbacks, Whitfield on a conference call with the merger escrow institution, sorting out the midnight filing confirmation. Marco at the work table with 2 of Dante's security coordinators, building the counter-response logistics from the inside out. Evelyn had claimed the corner of the desk closest to the window and covered it in the architectural equivalent of her brain. The floor plan, the guest list, a timeline she'd built in 15-minute increments from the co-signatories' 6 a.m. arrivals through the 11 o'clock ceremony, with every point of potential contact and every decision node marked in the particular notation system she had developed over years of managing other people's complicated days. At 3:45, Dante brought her a cup of coffee and set it beside the floor plan and stood looking at what she had built on his desk. He was quiet for a moment. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. What? Worked through a crisis like this, the way you think through it. It's not the first time. She picked up the coffee. I managed logistics for a medical nonprofit for 4 years before I went into executive support. Crisis management was part of the job. When you're running supply chains for field operations in difficult environments, you learn to build contingencies and hold the thread of the plan at the same time. Why did you leave it? She looked at the floor plan. Budget collapse. The organization lost its primary funding source and reduced staff by 60% in 8 months. I was in the last 20%. She paused. My mother got sick around the same time. I needed the income stability of a private sector position more than I needed... She stopped. More than I needed the work to mean something. He said, Does this mean something? She looked at him. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me Monday afternoon. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that she had, over 3 weeks, developed an entirely too precise ability to read. The gathered quality, the chess player's attention, and underneath it, further down, the thing that wasn't composure, the thing that was actually him. Get some sleep, he said. 2 hours. The couch in the conference room. I'm not... 2 hours, he said. You're not useful at 6 a.m. if you're running on empty at 3:45. He looked at the desk. I'll hold the plan. She looked at him, at the work spread across his desk, at the cup of coffee he had brought her. 1 hour, she said. 2. She went to the conference room. She lay down on the couch with her notepad on her chest, and she closed her eyes, and she did not expect to sleep. She slept for exactly 2 hours. Sunday moved the way days move when they are holding something, quickly in some places and with agonizing slowness in others, the pacing of a thing that knows it's building toward an event and can't stop itself. By 8 in the morning, the freight entrance to the Ashford Grand's Northeast Service Corridor had been quietly addressed by 2 of Dante's people who had a relationship with the building's facilities management going back years. Not sealed, that would be noticed, adjusted. The freight elevator key system was modified at the level of its internal mechanism, a change invisible to anyone who didn't know it had happened, meaning the elevator would respond to the key but would stop at the wrong floor. Not the 7th, the 6th. An empty event space, uncarpeted, unlit, the kind of room where the only thing waiting was time. The signal, whatever the plan inside the ceremony was using to communicate with the team in the corridor, was a problem Evelyn had sat with for 3 hours Sunday morning before she solved it, not through technology but through the floor plan. There was one position in the Grand Meridian room from which the Northwest service door was directly visible. One seat at the arrangement they were planning that gave a clear line of sight to the door that the team in the freight corridor would come through. If you moved that seat, rotated the table arrangement by 11 degrees, a change so small it would look like a setup adjustment, the line of sight disappeared. The plant would have no visual confirmation of the door. Without visual confirmation of the door's status, the signal to move would be guesswork, and guesswork in a confined space was dangerous to the people doing the guessing. She called the Ashford Grand's event coordinator at 9:15 and requested a minor adjustment to the table configuration for optimal camera angles for the signing. The coordinator agreed without question, because event coordinators in buildings like the Ashford Grand were very good at agreeing with things that sounded like they had a reason. The table rotated 11 degrees. At 11 Sunday morning, she met briefly with the security coordinator assigned to the ceremony's main entrance screening. She did not explain the full situation. She gave him enough that he understood what to look for in the legal representative who had been recently appointed, without giving him enough to act on prematurely. Watch. Don't touch. If the ceremony begins and the person attempts to use a communication device, note the time and do nothing else until you receive a signal from her directly. The coordinator looked at her with the expression of a man who was doing significant internal recalibrating of who in the room he was supposed to take direction from. Mr. Moretti approved this, she said. He nodded. She went back to the 43rd floor. She found Dante in his office with Marco, and the specific quality of the room told her before either of them spoke that something had happened. Marco was standing. That was the first thing. He had been sitting for most of the past 14 hours, the posture of a man under a specific kind of restraint, but now he was standing, and his face had the look of someone who has just finished saying something difficult and is waiting for the ground to stop moving. Dante was at the window, his back to the room. Not the weight-carrying posture from the night before. Something different, stiffer. The posture of anger being held at the distance you hold a thing when touching it is not an option. She stopped in the doorway. Neither of them spoke. What happened? She said. Marco looked at her. There's something I didn't tell you last night, he said. Something I held back. The cold moved through her from the base of her spine upward. The secondary arm, Marco said. The physical component. I told you what I knew about the method. The freight entrance, the team. He stopped. I didn't tell you why I knew it. She waited. Reyes told me 3 weeks ago, Marco said. The full plan. He described it as insurance. If I ever considered reversing course, he wanted me to know what was already in motion so I understood the cost of stopping it. He looked at his hands. He told me about the ceremony, the timing, the team in the corridor. A pause. He also told me who the team answers to directly. It's not Reyes. Dante turned from the window. The team on the ground, Marco said, reports to a separate coordinator, someone Reyes brought in specifically because this person has no documented connection to the consortium, no financial trail, no communication record, complete deniability for Reyes regardless of outcome. He looked at Dante. The coordinator is someone you know. The room was very still. Caruso, Dante said. Marco said, yes. The word landed and sat and did not move. Evelyn heard from somewhere very quiet inside her own processing the specific click of a thing falling into place. Not satisfaction, nothing like satisfaction, more like the sound a lock makes when it opens and you understand for the first time that it was locked. Caruso, who she had suspected from the beginning. Caruso, who had been systematically cleared by every piece of evidence that pointed elsewhere. Caruso, who had been not the leak, but the operational arm. The man with 12 years of access to every security protocol, every personnel structure, every physical layout of every Moretti Group relationship in the city. Not feeding information to Reyes, executing Reyes's plans on the ground. He built the operations structure, Dante said. His voice was quiet in the way that things are quiet when the volume has been turned all the way down on purpose. Every security protocol this organization runs. He designed them. Which means he knows every vulnerability in them, Evelyn said. Every one. Including the Ashford Grand arrangement. Dante looked at her. If Caruso is coordinating the team on the ground tomorrow, the freight elevator adjustment may not be enough. He knows this building. He has relationships with facilities staff. If he arrives before the ceremony and has access to the maintenance systems, he could reverse the elevator adjustment, she said, in under 10 minutes. She looked at the floor plan, which she had brought with her. She had barely put it down in the past 12 hours. She looked at the northeast corridor, the freight elevator, the sixth-floor redirect she'd arranged with such careful, quiet precision. She looked at Caruso's name on the organizational chart she'd been carrying in her head for 11 weeks, 12 years. The operations structure the building ran on. The man who knew where everything was because he had put it there. Where is he now? She said. We don't know, Marco said. He hasn't been at the building since Friday. His car service. We checked. No booking since Thursday. She thought. She looked at the floor plan. She looked at the guest list. She went back through the timeline she had built the night before, the 15-minute increments, every decision node. The co-signatories land at JFK at 6 a.m., she said. They're in transit to their hotels by 7:30. The ceremony is at 11. Between 7:30 and 11 there is a window when the Ashford Grand is running pre-event setup, when facilities and catering staff are moving through the building, when an extra person in the service areas would not be anomalous. She looked at Dante. Caruso gets into the building during setup, before the ceremony. He doesn't need to reverse the elevator adjustment if he gets there early enough to do it before we do. Then we need to be there first, Dante said. We need to be there at 6, she said, before any external access to the building's service systems is possible. Dante picked up his phone. The rest of Sunday was a controlled dismantling of every remaining assumption. Yet, Monday arrived the way days do when you haven't been to sleep. Not by being noticeably different from Sunday night, but by the light changing, gray coming up through the office windows, the city shifting registers in the way it did in the early hours, quieter, and then gradually less quiet, the sound of it building back toward its daytime volume like an instrument warming up. Evelyn was at the Ashford Grand by 5:48. She had changed into the clothes she kept in her desk's bottom drawer, a habit from the nonprofit years, when overnight crises were common enough that having a change of clothes in your workspace was basic preparation. Dark jacket, dark trousers, flat shoes, because she had learned in 11 weeks and change that this was not the kind of environment in which heels were a practical decision. She went in through the main entrance with the credentials Dante's team had arranged, and she went directly to the facilities management office on the second floor, and she sat with the chief engineer for 20 minutes, and she was very specific about what she needed and very clear about the authority behind the request. By 6:15, 2 of Dante's security people were at the freight elevator with the building's chief engineer, and the elevator had been taken fully offline, not adjusted, not redirected, but simply not operational, a mechanical issue that had been discovered during the morning's routine pre-event check. Regrettable. The team was working on it. It would not affect the event because the event used the main elevator bank. At 6:43, she found Caruso. Not in the service areas. Not at the freight entrance. In the building's lower parking structure. In a car that had been there since 5:20, according to the parking system's entry log. A rental car registered to a name she didn't recognize, and that Marco, reached on the phone in 30 seconds, confirmed was a Reyes Consortium associate's secondary identity. He was in the car when she found him, sitting in the driver's seat with a phone in his hand, not looking at it, looking at the concrete wall in front of the car the way you look at something when you're not looking at it, when you're looking at something that exists only in your head. He was 53 years old, and he looked, in the parking structure's flat fluorescent light, considerably older than that. She stood at the car window. She knocked once, gently. He looked at her. His face did several things. Then it went very still. She said through the glass, "The freight elevator is offline. Your team lands on the 6th floor. Building security is aware of the northeast service entrance. Mr. Moretti's people have the corridor." She paused. "It's over, Mr. Caruso." He looked at her for a long moment. He got out of the car. He was taller than she remembered from the few times she'd seen him on the 43rd floor, or maybe it was the particular geometry of underground parking that distorted scale. He looked at her with the exhausted, specific expression of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can put it down, except that putting it down means something he hasn't fully finished calculating. "You're the secretary," he said. "The new one." "Yes." "You did all of this." "We did all of this," she said. "I just kept records." He looked at the phone in his hand. She thought for one careful moment about what he might do with it, who he might call, whether there was a contingency she hadn't accounted for, whether the team in the corridor had a separate trigger that didn't require Caruso's coordination. He turned the phone over and placed it on the roof of the car. He said, 12 years. She waited. 12 years I built that place, he said. Every system, every protocol. When Dante was running 18 people out of a lease in Chelsea, I was the one who designed the security structure that let him grow without exposing himself. Every time he expanded, I expanded the protection around that expansion. He stopped. His jaw moved. And then the overseas acquisition attempt started, and Reyes made contact, and he told me. He was very specific about what he could do to those 3 subsidiaries if he chose to, and what that would mean for the people working inside them. He paused. I have people inside those subsidiaries, people I placed, people who trust that the system they're operating inside is sound. She understood. She didn't say so immediately. She let him have the space of what he'd said. You thought you were protecting them, she said. I thought I was managing a threat, he said, giving Reyes enough access to keep him from exercising the option that would have actually caused damage, controlling what he got, keeping the worst of it from... He stopped. I told myself it was triage, that I was doing triage. For 8 months. For 8 months, he said. And then the ceremony. When he told me what he was planning for the ceremony, His voice did something that it hadn't done in the conversation before. A crack in the surface, small, but there. I'm not a violent man, Ms. Harper. I've never been a violent man. Whatever you think I am, I'm not that. I know, she said, which is why you've been sitting in this parking structure since 5:20 in the morning without going anywhere. He looked at her. You didn't come here to coordinate the team, she said. You came here to stop it. You just hadn't figured out how yet. He was quiet for a long time. He's in his office, she said, on the 43rd floor. He's been there all night. She paused. If you want to tell him yourself, you still can. That's still possible. Caruso looked at the phone on the car roof, looked at the concrete wall, looked at her. He picked up the phone. He called his own team in the corridor. She listened to him stand in a parking structure at 6:47 in the morning and tell 4 men in a service corridor, 1 floor above a ceremony that hadn't started yet, to stand down, to leave the building through the loading dock on the south side, to make no further contact with Reyes or his representatives. She listened to the silence after he hung up. She said, Thank you. He said nothing. He looked like a man standing in a place where everything had already happened and what remained was the long, complicated process of living with the landscape of it. She took him upstairs. The ceremony began at 11 and concluded at 12:40. She watched it from the back of the Grand Meridian room, standing near the northwest wall, as far from the service door as the room's geometry allowed. 41 guests. 3 co-signatories who had flown in from 3 different countries and knew nothing of what had preceded their arrival. The legal representative she had identified as a plant sat in his assigned seat and watched the proceedings with the expression of a man waiting for something that wasn't coming, growing incrementally more uncertain as the minutes passed and the elevator in the northeast corridor remained offline and the service door remained closed and nothing happened. At 12:20, when the signing had begun and the event was clearly proceeding without interruption, she watched him take out his phone under the table and look at it and put it away. He looked at the service door. He looked at his phone again. He put it in his pocket and sat very still for the remaining 20 minutes of the ceremony with the particular stillness of a man reassessing his immediate future. The last signature was applied at 12:38. The room applauded. She let herself breathe. It was 3 in the afternoon before the building cleared. Guests, staff, the security complement, the escrow representatives with their countersigned documentation. The Grand Meridian room was returned to the facilities team for breakdown, and the Northwest service door was opened by a catering staff member who needed access to the storage rooms behind it and found nothing there except a corridor. Evelyn sat in the lobby of the Ashford Grand with a glass of water she wasn't drinking and her notepad open to a blank page, and she looked at the blank page for a long time without writing anything. She was extraordinarily tired, not frightened. The fear had burned through in the parking structure and the early morning logistics and the 2 hours of sleep on a conference room couch that felt now like something that had happened to a different person. Just tired. The specific deep cellular exhaustion that came from running at full capacity for an extended period and then stopping. She thought about Gerald the cat, who had probably destroyed something while she was gone and would be entirely unapologetic about it. She thought about her mother, who she hadn't called in 3 days. She thought about the resignation letter she had deleted from her desktop and what it would mean to try to write a 4th one, and whether she was the same person who would have written it. She thought about a lot of things, sitting in the lobby of the Ashford Grand at 3 in the afternoon on the other side of something she didn't have a precise word for. Dante came through the lobby at 3:27. He saw her and stopped. He looked like a man who had also not slept, but wore it differently than she did. She wore it with the visible softness of someone whose edges had dissolved, and he wore it with the stillness of someone who had compressed everything down into a smaller space to conserve what remained. He still had his jacket on. She didn't know how that was possible. He came and sat in the chair across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. Caruso turned himself into the organization's legal counsel this morning. Full statement, full cooperation. He paused. Whitfield is managing the documentation. The Reyes agreement holds on the acquisition side. The ceremony completed without... He stopped. "Without incident," she said. "Without incident," he said. The lobby moved around them. A Monday afternoon hotel lobby, people checking in and out, the ordinary machinery of a building that had no idea what had happened inside it in the past 41 hours. "Marco," she said. "House arrest pending review," Dante said. "My legal team is handling it. There will be a process. It will be..." He looked at his hands. "Long." "Are you all right?" He looked at her. "I ask because you were up all night, and you've just finished something significant," she said. "Standard concern for a colleague. I'm just asking." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was, she thought, the most unguarded she had seen on his face in all the weeks she had been inside his building and his orbit and the complicated gravity of him. Not the almost smile, something further in. "No," he said, "not entirely." "That's honest," she said. "You asked an honest question." She looked at the blank page in her notepad. She picked up the pen and put it down again. "The man I worked for before this," she said, "used to say that the cost of doing the right thing was always exactly what you could afford -1, that it always took something you needed." She paused. "I think he was right." Dante said, "What did this take from you?" She thought about it. The version of me that could still be surprised by how much people are capable of, she said. Both ways, the bad and the good. She paused. I don't think I get that back. He was quiet. What did it take from you? She said. He thought about it the way he thought about things, actually, with the whole of himself, not reaching for a quick answer. She waited. Marco, he said, finally, simply. Not the Marco who did what he did. The Marco I thought he was. He looked at the lobby. I've been replacing my understanding of the past 11 years with something smaller and less comfortable, and I'll be doing that for a while. Yes, she said. You will. He looked at her. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, she said. It isn't. He made choices that put people in danger, and he did it for 8 months while you trusted him. That's not something that gets resolved quickly. No, he said. But he also sat in that office and gave us everything, she said. He didn't have to. He could have given us enough to make himself look cooperative and held back the things that actually mattered. He didn't. He gave us Caruso. He gave us the ceremony plan. He gave us the financing covenant. She paused. People are not one thing. That's exhausting, and it's also true. Dante looked at her. You're very direct, he said. I've been told that before, she said, usually with less positive framing. I'm not framing it negatively, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The lobby moved. Your mother, he said, after a moment. You haven't called her. She looked at him. You mentioned her Sunday morning, he said. You said you hadn't called in 3 days. She had said that. She had said it in passing, the quiet half-sentence of someone speaking aloud a thing they'd been carrying. She had not expected him to keep it. She'll be worried, he said. She worries anyway, Evelyn said. It's her primary hobby. Still, he said. She picked up her phone. She looked at it. She put it back down. Not yet, she said. I need to be a little further from all of this before I call her. She can tell when I'm inside something, even through the phone. He said, She sounds like someone worth worrying about you. Evelyn looked at the blank page again. She is, she said. The weeks that followed had the quality of an aftermath, not an ending exactly, but the particular terrain of a landscape that has been significantly altered and is still settling into its new shape. The regulatory filing was approved without challenge. The merger closed. The 3 international subsidiaries moved into the new structure, and the relationships Dante had been protecting through all of this were, for the first time in 8 months, no longer exposed. The Reyes Consortium began its 75-day divestiture process. Whitfield documented it. The minority stakes unwound. Caruso's full cooperation with the internal legal process resulted in a resolution that Evelyn was not privy to in its specifics, and she did not ask. She had learned, in 11 weeks and then some, the geography of what was hers to know and what was someone else's to carry. Marco's situation took longer. It moved through its process in the way these things moved, with the accumulated weight of 8 months and the specific legal architecture that Whitfield built around the cooperation agreement. And what it arrived at was not what anyone might have designed as a clean outcome, because there were no clean outcomes available, only honest ones. Marco knew the difference by the end. Evelyn moved her desk back, not to the old workspace on the lower floor. The anteroom outside Dante's office had become, through the force of what had happened there, the desk she worked at. She moved her things back into it properly, organized the space the way she organized all spaces, with the specific deliberate attention that made things findable when you needed them fast. She bought a new fitness magazine for the bottom drawer. She left it empty. Her job title changed. The formal paperwork described it as Strategic Operations Director, which she felt was somewhat grand for a person who noticed footnotes and filed things carefully, but Whitfield had drafted the description, and she trusted his precision with language more than her own instinct toward understatement. Her salary changed too. She called her mother that evening. Her mother cried, which was the response of a woman who had been worrying for years and had just been told she could stop worrying about the specific thing that had been worrying her most. They talked for 45 minutes. Her mother asked about the job, and Evelyn described it in terms that were accurate without being complete, which was, she had come to understand, a skill that her mother had been practicing on her behalf for her entire life. Gerald destroyed a plant while she was on the phone. She let him. Quote. The second gala arrived in December, 2 months after the Monday ceremony, on a Friday evening in the same Ashford Grand Ballroom, where, 11 weeks and a lifetime earlier, she had stood with an empty tray and a borrowed handkerchief and the specific terror of someone who has just ruined everything. The Moretti Foundation event. Black tie. Crystal chandeliers. 500 guests. A string quartet playing something European and dark at the far end of the room. She was wearing a different black dress. This one fit better. She had bought it specifically for the occasion, which was itself a kind of answer to a question she'd been approaching obliquely for 2 months. She was standing near the bar, not with a tray, not in any position that suggested she was carrying anything, when one of the servers caught her eye from across the room with the universal expression of someone who needed help and had selected the nearest available adult. She saw what he was pointing at. A tray. A full tray of champagne glasses. And the adjacent table that was 3 steps away and the short distance between them. She looked at the tray. She looked at the distance. She looked at the ballroom, at the 500 people, at the chandeliers, at the room where all of it had started. She picked up the tray. She took 3 careful steps to the adjacent table, set it down without incident, and stood back. The server appeared beside her. "Thank you," he said, with the genuine relief of someone who had expected disaster. "Sure," she said. She was looking across the room. Dante was at the central table, standing, and he was looking at her with the expression that she had catalogued and cross-referenced and filed very carefully in the part of her that kept the things that mattered. Not the composed expression, not the chess player's eyes, but the thing underneath. The specific private thing that was actually him. He crossed the room. He did not hurry, because he was not a man who hurried, but there was a direction to his movement that was unambiguous. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her hands. Empty, clean. No wine on either of them. "Don't say anything," she said. "I wasn't going to." "You were going to say something about the tray." "I was going to say," he said, "that you look well." She looked at him. He looked, she thought, less like a man at war than he had at any point in the past 11 weeks. Something had settled in him, or begun to settle. The slow geological process of a person integrating a difficult season. He still wasn't sleeping enough. She could still see the evidence of it. But the weight was different now, less like something he was carrying against his will, and more like something he had chosen to hold. "You look less like you're planning 3 things simultaneously," she said. "Only 2, he said. Progress. He almost smiled. The thing that was almost a smile and had been, she thought, edging closer to its own definition over the course of the past 2 months. "Dance with me," he said. She looked at him. "The orchestra is playing," he said. "There is a floor designated for that purpose." He looked at her with complete seriousness. "It seems like an appropriate use of the space." "I'm not a very good dancer," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm also a liability on any surface where another person's feet might be in range of mine." "I'm aware of your spatial relationship with consequences," he said. "I'm willing to accept the risk." She looked at him for a moment. At the ballroom, at the room where she had been terrified and then useful and then something she hadn't finished naming, at the room where it had all started. "All right," she said. He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked onto the floor, and the orchestra was playing something that was dark and European and not particularly suited to anything she would have described as dancing, but they moved to it anyway, the way you move through things. Not perfectly, not without effort, but continuously and in the same direction. She stepped on his foot once, early. He said nothing. She said, "Sorry." "Don't," he said. They kept dancing, and he was close enough that she could see in the light of the crystal chandeliers the particular quality of his face at rest. Not composed, not gathered, not the architectural stillness that he wore through hallways and boardrooms and difficult rooms. Just his face. The lines around the eyes and the jaw, and the evidence of a man who had been many things in his life and was currently, in this specific moment, choosing to be here. She thought about the handkerchief, about the 5 words. about a tray positioned by someone else's intention and the specific chain of events that followed from a quarter second of coincidence, or something that looked like coincidence until you looked at it from far enough away and it looked like something else. Not destiny. Not anything as clean as that. More like the accumulated result of a particular kind of attention, meeting a particular kind of need at the exact moment both were present. She thought about her notepad, about the fitness magazine, about the post-it on a footnote nobody asked her to notice. She thought about what it cost, what it took, what it returned. She thought about her mother, who was doing better this month than last, whose voice on the phone had sounded like itself again, rather than the careful, restrained version she'd been hearing for 2 years. She thought about all of this while she danced with a man who was holding her with the specific, deliberate attention of someone who understood that what he was holding was not replaceable and was choosing not to be careless with it. "Dante," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "Yes." "The suit," she said. "I still owe you for it." "No," he said. $11,000 is—" "No," he said again, and the word was final without being hard, the kind of no that is also a different kind of yes. She looked up at him. "You gave me back my organization," he said. "You gave me back something I thought I understood about the people around me, even when what you actually gave me was a truer and harder version of it." He paused. A breath. "And you did it by noticing things nobody asked you to notice, and filing them somewhere useful, and carrying trays when you shouldn't, and being exactly the kind of person that every room underestimates until it's too late to correct the assessment." She looked at him. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At what?" "At whatever this is." She made a small gesture that encompassed the dancing and the chandeliers and him. "I'm better at footnotes." "I know," he said. "That's what makes you good at this." She thought about that. She thought about the version of herself who had stood in this same room 11 weeks ago with an empty tray and the certain knowledge that she had ended something, her job, her income, possibly something more fundamental than either of those. And the version of herself who was here now, in a better dress, having not dropped the champagne tray, standing inside the life that had grown from that specific, accidental collision. Not a clean life. Not a safe one. Not the kind of life where the filing was orderly and the footnotes behaved and nothing moved when you weren't watching it. But hers. "The filing," she said. "The merger documentation. I looked at the final registered terms today." A pause. "The subsidiary restructure creates a governance board with 3 independent seats." "It does," he said. "Those seats require appointment." "They do." "I have opinions about the qualification criteria," she said. He looked at her. "I'll need to see the draft criteria document," she said, "before it's finalized, if that would be appropriate." "I'll have it on your desk tomorrow morning," he said. She nodded. They kept dancing. The ballroom held 500 people, and the particular kind of noise that 500 people in a good room produce. Warm and continuous, the sound of a world that was functioning, that was intact, that had come through something it might not have come through and was here anyway, on the other side of it, doing the ordinary, extraordinary work of continuing. Above them, the chandeliers held their light. Around them, the room moved. Outside the windows, Manhattan did what Manhattan always did. Enormous and indifferent and brilliant and loud, generating the future the way it always had, without asking anyone's permission. She was not afraid of any of it. She was tired, and she was not perfectly suited to this world or its rooms or its particular demands, and she stepped on his foot one more time before the song ended, and she said sorry again, and he said don't again. And she thought, very quietly, in the part of herself she reserved for things that mattered enough to be kept without writing down. This is what it feels like when the right thing costs exactly what you can afford. And then the song changed, and the room changed, and they kept dancing, and that was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough.